Rain is falling outside your window right now. Or if it isn't, imagine it is. Because the story you are about to hear happened on a night exactly like this one, and the people who witnessed it never slept the same way again. Welcome to Shadow's Lair. Tonight we have over an hour of true, documented horror story, the kind that don't end when the video does. The kind that follow you into the dark. Before we begin, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and press the bell so you never miss a story. And if you have been here before, drop a like before we start. It tells the darkness that you are ready. Because once this begins, there is no comfortable place to stop. The Overtoun Bridge. Why have 300 dogs jumped from the same spot? There is a question that most people never stop to ask. What if animals know something we don't? Not tricks. Not instincts. Not the way birds sense storms before they arrive, or how dogs can smell illness before doctors can diagnose it. Something older, something deeper, something that exists just beyond the reach of human perception. For thousands of years, nearly every civilization on Earth has believed that animals possess an awareness that humanity lost long ago. Ancient Egyptians believed cats guarded doorways between worlds. Celtic tribes believed certain dogs could see spirits moving through forests after sunset. Across Europe, black dogs were said to stand at crossroads where the living and the dead unknowingly passed one another. In villages scattered throughout the world, people whispered the same warning generation after generation: pay attention when an animal refuses to go somewhere, because sometimes it sees something you cannot. Imagine for a moment that you are walking your dog on a quiet afternoon. The sky above you is perfectly clear. No storm clouds, no rain, no thunder, nothing unusual. The air carries the scent of wet grass and distant pine trees. Birds drift lazily overhead. Leaves rustle softly in the breeze. It feels like an ordinary day. The kind of day you would forget within a week. Your dog walks beside you, relaxed, happy, tail gently swaying. Everything feels normal. Then, without warning, something changes. Not around you, around your dog. Its pace slows, its ears rise, its body becomes strangely still. At first, you barely notice. Perhaps it caught a scent, perhaps it heard an animal somewhere in the woods. Dogs do that all the time. You continue walking, but your dog doesn't. It stops. You turn toward it. The animal is staring, not at the trees, not at the sky, not at another person. It is staring into empty space, focused, intent. Watching something that isn't there, at least, something that isn't there for you. A chill creeps up your spine. You call its name. No response. You tug gently on the leash. Still nothing. The dog remains frozen. Its eyes fixed on a point beyond your understanding. Then it takes a step forward, another, and another, slowly, deliberately, as though it is approaching someone, or something. Its tail no longer moves. Its breathing becomes calm, almost peaceful. The dog reaches the edge of a stone bridge. It pauses. The wind whispers through the trees below. Somewhere far beneath the bridge, water trickles through a narrow gorge hidden by shadows. The dog leans forward. You follow its gaze. There is nothing there, only empty air, only darkness beneath ancient stone, only a drop that would kill any living creature foolish enough to leap. Yet the dog continues staring, not frightened, not confused, not trapped, interested, curious, as though someone is standing below the bridge and calling its name. Then the dog does something impossible. It jumps, not suddenly, not violently, not like an animal startled by fear. It jumps the way a child runs toward a parent waiting with open arms. It jumps as though it has made a choice, as though it sees something worth following. You scream. You rush forward. Your heart pounds against your ribs. The leash tears through. Your hands. For a brief moment, the world ceases to make sense, and then you look over the edge, 50 feet below, broken rocks weighed among twisted branches and moss-covered stone. You search desperately for an explanation. A loose footing, a misstep, a hidden animal, anything that allows reality to remain intact. But there is nothing, only questions that become far more terrifying when you learn you are not the first person this has happened to, not the 10th, not the 100th. Over 300 dogs have jumped from the same bridge, the same side, the same location, the same section of stone. Witnesses describe the same sequence of events. The dog is calm, the dog stops. The dog stares, the dog jumps, again, and again, and again. For decades, the pattern never changes, the mystery never ends, and perhaps the most unsettling detail of all is this: many owners swear their dogs did not look afraid. They did not appear panicked, they did not seem confused. The dogs looked focused, drawn, as though they were responding to something invisible, something waiting below, something only they could see. Scientists have searched for answers, historians have searched for answers, researchers have searched for answers, theories have come and gone, predators, sense, instincts, geography, coincidence, yet the jumps continue, year after year. Generation after generation, the bridge remains, silent, watching, keeping whatever secret lies beneath its weathered stone. And if this were merely a story about dogs, perhaps that would be unsettling enough, but it isn't. Because Overtoun Bridge carries another darkness, a darkness connected not to animals, but to human beings, a darkness that transformed a strange mystery into something far more disturbing, something that forced people to ask whether the land itself might be cursed, whether some places can poison thoughts, whether certain locations can whisper ideas into vulnerable minds. Whether the ancient legends about boundaries between worlds were never legends at all. Tonight, we travel to Dumbarton, Scotland, to a bridge surrounded by centuries of folklore, to a location feared by locals and investigated by scientists, to one of the most documented and unexplained mysteries in the United Kingdom. A place where hundreds of dogs have willingly leapt toward death, a place where witnesses continue to report the same impossible behavior, a place where answers remain frustratingly out of reach, because somewhere among the shadows beneath Overtoun Bridge, there may be a truth that no one wants to find, and if the stories are true, if animals really can sense things that humans cannot, then perhaps the most frightening question is not why the dogs jumped. Perhaps the most frightening question is what they were trying to reach, or worse, what was reaching for them. There are places in this world where something feels wrong, not dangerous, not haunted, not obviously threatening, just wrong. The feeling arrives without warning, a subtle discomfort, a quiet tension, a sensation so faint that most people struggle to describe it. You step into a location and suddenly become aware of things you normally ignore: the silence, the shadows, the emptiness. You find yourself looking over your shoulder for no reason, listening more carefully than usual, walking a little faster than you intended. Nothing has happened, yet something deep within your instincts insists that you should leave. Most people experience such feelings once or twice in their lives. A deserted road at midnight, an abandoned building hidden deep in the countryside, a forest trail that suddenly becomes too quiet, a place that seems to exist slightly outside the normal world. Usually, those feelings fade, reality reasserts itself, logic takes control, the discomfort passes. But in western Scotland, near the ancient town of Dumbarton, there is a place where that feeling never truly disappears. A place where ordinary explanations seem to stop working, a place where questions have accumulated for more than 70 years, a place where something continues happening despite investigations, despite studies, despite every attempt to explain it. The location is called Overtoun Bridge. At first glance, there is nothing remarkable about it. It is beautiful, elegant, almost peaceful. Constructed in the late 19th century, the bridge stretches gracefully across a deep wooded gorge on the grounds of the historic Overtoun estate. Victorian stone arches rise above the ravine below. Weathered masonry stands against the Scottish landscape. The surrounding woodland seems timeless, ancient, quiet. The sort of location photographers dream about, the sort of place tourists visit hoping to experience a piece of history. Nothing about it appears threatening, nothing about it suggests that it should be feared, and yet this bridge has earned one of the most disturbing reputations in the modern world. Because something has been happening here, something documented, something witnessed, something repeated so many times that coincidence begins to feel like an inadequate explanation. For decades, dogs have approached this bridge and jumped, not slipped, not stumbled, not accidentally fallen. Jumped. The distinction matters, because witnesses repeatedly describe the same sequence of events, again, and again, and again. The dog walks calmly beside its owner, its tail sways gently, its behavior appears completely normal, nothing seems unusual, nothing seems wrong. Then the animal reaches a specific section of the bridge, a particular area on the right-hand parapet overlooking the gorge below. The dog slows, it pauses, its attention changes, something captures its focus. The animal stares into the ravine, not for a moment, sometimes for several seconds, completely absorbed, completely focused, as though it has become aware of something hidden beneath the bridge. Then it jumps. The first time you hear such a story, it sounds impossible, like folklore, like an urban legend invented to frighten tourists. Surely there must be an exaggeration somewhere, surely the details have been distorted over time, surely the truth is less dramatic. Then you begin examining the reports, the interviews, the witness accounts, the newspaper archives, and the impossible begins to feel uncomfortably real. Because this is not one story, it is hundreds of stories, hundreds of incidents, hundreds of witnesses, many of whom describe remarkably similar experiences. Some estimates suggest that more than 300 dogs have jumped from Overtoun Bridge since records began attracting public attention. The exact number remains difficult to verify, but the phenomenon itself is undeniable. The reports exist. The witnesses exist, the bridge exists, and the mystery persists. What makes the story even stranger is that the dogs do not appear distressed before jumping. They are not running in panic. They are not fleeing danger. They do not behave like frightened animals. Witnesses consistently describe something far more unsettling. The dogs appear interested, curious, focused, as though something beyond the parapet has captured their complete attention, as though they are responding to an invitation. Imagine standing beside your dog on a quiet afternoon. Imagine watching a companion you have known for years suddenly become fascinated by something you cannot perceive. Imagine calling its name, watching it ignore you, watching its attention remain fixed on the gorge below. Imagine feeling helpless as the animal moves toward the edge. Imagine realizing that for a few brief seconds, your dog appears to be experiencing something completely beyond your understanding, something invisible to you, something real to it. That feeling appears throughout the history of Overtoun Bridge. Again and again, owners describe the same unsettling sensation, not fear, confusion, the profound confusion of witnessing behavior that seems to exist outside ordinary explanation. Yet the story becomes even darker, because not every dog dies. Some survive the fall, broken, injured, traumatized, yet alive, and according to numerous reports over the years, some surviving dogs later returned to the bridge and attempted to approach the same location again, the same section of stone, the same parapet, the same mystery, as though whatever attracted them the first time remained unfinished, waiting, still there, still calling. This detail alone transformed a strange local story into an international mystery. Scientists became interested, journalists became interested, Researchers became interested, theories emerged, explanations followed, debates began. Yet despite decades of investigation, the bridge continued generating questions, questions that refused to disappear. Questions that lingered in the minds of everyone who studied the phenomenon. Why the same location? Why the same behavior? Why dogs? Why here? And perhaps most importantly, what captures their attention? Because every witness eventually arrives at the same moment, the moment where the dog stops, the moment where the dog stares. The moment where the dog appears to notice something, and nobody knows what that something is. The mystery might have remained merely unusual if that were the end of the story, a strange animal behavior case, a tragic curiosity, an unsolved puzzle. But Overtoun Bridge carries darker stories as well, stories involving human tragedy, ancient folklore, legends of thin places where boundaries between worlds supposedly weaken. Stories that transform a mystery into something far more unsettling. And as we begin examining those stories, a disturbing possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps the bridge itself is not the mystery. Perhaps the bridge is merely the stage, the location where something else reveals itself. Something hidden, something unseen, something that generations of dogs appear to notice long before we do. Because tonight, as darkness settles across Scotland, Overtoun Bridge still stands, the same stone, the same gorge, the same silence, and somewhere in the future, another dog will cross it, another dog will reach that section of parapet, another dog will stop, another dog will stare. And once again, no one will know what it sees, except the dog, and whatever may be waiting below. Long before Overtoun Bridge existed, long before the first stone was laid, long before Victorian architects imagined elegant arches stretching across a lonely Scottish gorge, the land was already feared, not because of anything people had seen, but because of what they felt. The forests surrounding modern-day Dumbarton have witnessed thousands of years of human history. Long before roads cut through the countryside and before grand estates rose from the hills, ancient Celtic tribes lived among these valleys. They hunted here, traveled here, buried their dead here, and according to surviving folklore, there were certain places they avoided whenever possible, places where the air felt wrong, places where sound seemed strangely muted, places where shadows appeared darker than they should have been, places where people reported feelings they could never fully explain. The Celts had a name for such locations. They called them thin places. At first glance, the term sounds harmless, almost beautiful, a poetic phrase carried forward through centuries of folklore, but beneath the gentle wording lurked something profoundly unsettling. To the ancient Celts, reality was not a single world. It was two worlds existing side by side. One was the realm of the living, the world of flesh and stone, the world of rivers and forests, the world where ordinary people spent their lives. The other was something far older, a realm beyond human understanding, a place inhabited by spirits, gods, forgotten beings, and entities that existed beyond the limits of mortal perception. Most of the time, these worlds remained separate. An invisible barrier divided them, a veil, a boundary, a wall no human eye could see. Yet according to Celtic belief, certain locations weakened that barrier. At those locations, the veil became thin, and when it became thin, things could pass through, not always physically, sometimes as whispers, sometimes as visions, sometimes as feelings so overwhelming that people became convinced they belonged to them. Ancient stories describe travelers hearing their names spoken by voices hidden among empty woods. Hunters following distant figures through forests only to discover nobody was there. Children speaking to unseen companions near sacred hills. Entire groups reporting the same strange sensation, the feeling that someone was standing nearby, watching, waiting, just beyond sight. For centuries, these stories were passed from one generation to the next, not as entertainment, not as campfire tales, as warnings. Because the people who lived closest to these locations believed something important. They believed that curiosity could be dangerous. The old stories spoke of individuals who wandered too far into certain places and returned changed, not possessed, not cursed. Changed, they became withdrawn, distracted, as though part of their attention remained focused somewhere else, as though something continued calling to them from beyond the visible world. Some reportedly disappeared altogether, others refused to discuss what they had experienced, and a few claimed they had encountered something waiting within the thin places, something ancient, something intelligent, something that noticed when it was being observed. Today, most historians view these stories as folklore, the natural result of centuries of superstition and oral tradition, and perhaps they are right. Perhaps these stories are nothing more than the fears of people trying to explain a world they did not yet understand. Yet one detail remains difficult to ignore. Many of these ancient stories originated on the very land where Overtoun Bridge now stands, long before the bridge, long before the mansion, long before newspaper headlines and scientific investigations. The location already carried a reputation. The woods surrounding the gorge were considered unusual. Locals spoke of strange sensations while walking among the trees. Visitors reported feelings of unease that seemed to appear without cause. Some described the impression of crossing an invisible boundary. One moment everything felt normal, the next, the landscape seemed subtly different, not visibly different, emotionally different. The way a familiar room suddenly feels uncomfortable despite nothing changing, the way a dream begins to feel real moments before you wake up. The sensation was impossible to measure, impossible to prove, yet the stories persisted, generation after generation, century after century, and then, in the 19th century, wealthy industrialist James White purchased the land and commissioned the construction of Overtoun House. The grand estate rose above the surrounding countryside. Soon after, the bridge was built, an elegant Victorian structure spanning the deep gorge below. To most people, it represented progress, architecture, engineering, civilized beauty imposed upon wild terrain. But some locals quietly wondered whether building a bridge across a thin place was wise, not because they expected anything supernatural, because ancient traditions often survive for a reason. The bridge itself appeared harmless. Its stone arches blended naturally into the landscape. Visitors admired its craftsmanship. Photographers captured its beauty. Families crossed it without concern. For decades, nothing unusual happened. Then the dogs began jumping, and suddenly the old stories no longer seemed quite so distant. Imagine standing on Overtoun Bridge on a cold autumn afternoon. The forest stretches endlessly below. Branches sway gently in the wind. The gorge beneath appears deeper than photographs suggest. The stone beneath your feet feels ancient despite its Victorian origins. The air is silent, almost unnaturally silent. Then imagine learning that for generations people believed this exact location existed on the boundary between worlds. Imagine hearing those stories, and then watching a perfectly healthy dog walk calmly to the same section of parapet where hundreds of others have stood, watching it stop. Watching it stare into empty space, watching it focus on something nobody else can see, and then leap, not with fear, not with panic, but with purpose. The rational mind immediately searches for explanations, instinct, scent, animal behavior. There must be an answer. There has to be, because the alternative is deeply uncomfortable. The alternative suggests that perhaps our understanding of reality is incomplete, that perhaps there are places where something ancient lingers beneath the surface, places where the invisible occasionally brushes against the visible, places where animals notice what humans ignore, places where the boundary between worlds grows dangerously thin. And if such places truly exist, then the question becomes terrifying, because a thin place does not merely allow us to look into another world, it may also allow something from the other side to look back, and if Overtoun Bridge truly stands upon one of those boundaries, then perhaps the mystery is not why the dogs jump, perhaps the mystery is what keeps drawing their attention to the gorge below, because whatever has been waiting there has been waiting for a very long time. For decades, Overtoun Bridge was a mystery, a disturbing mystery, an unsettling mystery, but still a mystery that belonged primarily to animals. People spoke about the dogs, the strange jumps, the impossible pattern, the same side of the bridge, the same section of stone, the same inexplicable behavior. It was bizarre, it was troubling, yet most people could still place the phenomenon into a comfortable category. Something odd was happening to the dogs, whatever the explanation might be. It seemed isolated to them. The bridge was strange, but it was not considered dangerous to people. Then came September of 1994, and everything changed, because after that day, Overtoun Bridge was no longer just a place associated with unexplained animal behavior. It became associated with something far darker, something human, something that continues to haunt the history of the bridge even now. The day began like any other. There was no thunderstorm gathering over the Scottish countryside, no dramatic warning, no sign that a tragedy was about to unfold. The bridge stood exactly as it always had, silent, motionless, ancient stone overlooking the deep gorge below. The same bridge that had already become known for decades of unexplained dog jumps, the same bridge that locals quietly whispered about after dark, the same bridge that many visitors crossed without giving a second thought. Somewhere on that ordinary day, Kevin Moy arrived carrying his infant son. What happened next would become one of the most disturbing incidents ever associated with Overtoun Bridge. Without warning, the infant was thrown from the bridge. The child fell into the rocky gorge below. The tragedy shocked Scotland. News spread quickly. People struggled to understand what had happened. Investigators searched for answers. Family members searched for answers. The public searched for answers. Because the event seemed impossible to reconcile with ordinary reality. How could something so horrific occur on a bridge already surrounded by decades of strange stories? And then came the explanation Kevin himself reportedly gave, according to numerous accounts. He had become convinced that his son was the Antichrist, not figuratively, not symbolically, not as some fleeting intrusive thought. He reportedly believed it completely. The conviction was absolute, certain, real. To him, it was not a theory, it was a fact, and that detail transformed an already disturbing tragedy into something profoundly unsettling. Because certainty can be one of the most frightening things a human being experiences, most people live with doubt, most people question themselves, most people hesitate. But there are moments when the human mind becomes locked onto an idea with terrifying confidence, an idea that arrives fully formed, an idea that feels undeniable. An idea that seems to come from somewhere beyond ordinary thought, whether that certainty originates from mental illness, emotional crisis, psychological stress, or something else entirely. The result can be catastrophic, and for many people familiar with the history of Overtoun Bridge, the location itself suddenly became impossible to ignore. Of all the places in Scotland, of all the bridges, of all the locations where such a tragedy might have occurred, why there? Why Overtoun? The question spread quickly. At first it appeared only in private conversations, then in local discussions, then among those already fascinated by the mystery of the dogs. People began connecting events. Not because evidence demanded it, because human beings naturally search for patterns, and Overtoun Bridge already possessed a reputation unlike any other location in Britain. For decades, stories had circulated about the land, the old Celtic concept of a thin place, the strange behavior of animals, the persistent feeling reported by some visitors that the atmosphere around the bridge felt different, heavier, more oppressive, more difficult to explain. Now a human tragedy had become part of that history, and once it did, The bridge's reputation changed forever. No longer was it simply a location where dogs behaved strangely. Now it was a place linked to one of the most shocking and heartbreaking events in modern Scottish history. As the years passed, paranormal investigators would revisit the story repeatedly. Some claimed the bridge exerted a psychological influence. Others suggested the surrounding folklore encouraged people to interpret unrelated events through a supernatural lens. Skeptics argued that coincidence and tragedy had become intertwined. Believers argued something much darker, that the bridge affected more than animals. That the land itself carried a presence, that whatever drew the dogs toward the gorge might also affect vulnerable human minds. No evidence has ever proven such claims. No scientific study has demonstrated any supernatural force connected to Overtoun Bridge, yet the questions remain. And questions have a strange habit of surviving long after answers fail to appear. Even today, visitors standing on the bridge often find themselves thinking about two separate mysteries: the dogs and Kevin Moy. One involves hundreds of unexplained jumps, the other involves a single horrifying act. They are entirely different events, yet both became permanently connected to the same location, the same stone bridge, the same silent gorge, the same landscape where ancient stories once warned of a boundary between worlds. And perhaps that is why the tragedy continues to disturb people decades later, not because it proves anything supernatural. It doesn't. Not because it provides answers. It doesn't. It disturbs people because it removes the comfort of separation. Before 1994, the mystery belonged to animals. After 1994, it belonged to everyone. The bridge was no longer merely a place where dogs jumped. It became a place where something incomprehensible had touched human lives as well. A place where folklore, tragedy, psychology, and mystery became impossible to untangle from one another. And from that moment forward, every new report of a dog standing motionless at the parapet carried a different weight. Every witness account felt darker. Every unexplained jump felt more unsettling, because now people were no longer asking what the dogs saw. They were asking a far more frightening question. What is it about this place that has inspired fear, fascination, tragedy, and unanswered questions for generations? And why does that question seem to grow more disturbing the longer you stand upon the bridge? Because if Overtoun Bridge is merely an ordinary structure, then decades of strange stories have somehow gathered around it by chance. But if it is not ordinary, if there is truly something unusual about the land beneath it, then perhaps the dogs were never the only ones listening. Perhaps they were simply the first to notice whatever has been waiting there all along. Every mystery has a beginning, a moment when something unusual happens for the first time, a moment so small and seemingly insignificant that nobody realizes they are witnessing the opening scene of a story that will one day become legend. The mystery of Overtoun Bridge is different, because nobody knows exactly when it began. There was no single incident that immediately drew attention. No dramatic event that made newspaper headlines overnight. No gathering of frightened witnesses pointing toward the bridge and demanding answers. Instead, the phenomenon emerged slowly, quietly, like a shadow lengthening across a room. One incident became two, two became five, five became 10. And by the time people realized a pattern existed, decades had already passed. The earliest documented reports began appearing during the 1950s. At first, local residents treated them as unfortunate accidents. A dog had fallen from the bridge. Tragic. But accidents happen, especially in the countryside. Dogs chase scents. They become distracted. They lose their footing. Nobody thought much of it. Then another dog fell, and then another, and then another. What disturbed witnesses was not the number of incidents, it was the similarity. The details were always nearly identical. The dogs were not behaving recklessly. They were not running wildly across the bridge. They were not fighting. They were not frightened. They were simply walking. Owners described peaceful afternoons, leisurely walks, ordinary days. the kind of days that leave no impression on memory, until the moment everything changes. One of the earliest accounts described a hunting dog crossing the bridge with its owner on a bright afternoon. The animal had shown no signs of distress, no unusual behavior, nothing that would suggest danger. Then, as it approached the right-hand parapet, it suddenly altered course, not abruptly, not frantically, deliberately, almost purposefully. The dog moved toward the stone wall, placed its front paws near the edge, looked down, and disappeared. The owner reportedly stood frozen in disbelief. For several seconds he could not process what he had witnessed. His mind searched desperately for another explanation. Perhaps the dog had slipped, perhaps it had lost balance, perhaps something startled it. But the more he replayed the event in his memory, the less convincing those explanations became. The dog had not slipped, it had jumped. Years later, another witness would describe nearly the same sequence. Different dog, different owner, different day, same bridge. The owner recalled his dog stopping as though it had suddenly noticed something extraordinary. The animal's attention became fixed, its body grew rigid, its eyes focused on a point beyond the parapet. The owner called its name, no response. The dog seemed completely absorbed. Then it leapt. The witness later admitted that what disturbed him most was not the jump itself, it was the expression on the dog's face. There had been no fear, no panic, no confusion. The dog had looked fascinated, as though it had discovered something it desperately wanted to reach. As the years passed, similar stories accumulated. A collie, a retriever, a shepherd, a spaniel, different breeds, different ages, different owners, yet the descriptions remained eerily consistent. The dogs would approach the same area of the bridge, not the center, not the opposite side, the same section, the same stretch of stone overlooking the gorge below. Witnesses began noticing other peculiar details. The incidents occurred more frequently during clear weather, bright days, calm afternoons, moments when visibility was at its best. This detail alone challenged common explanations. If weather were a factor, one might expect accidents during rain or heavy fog. Yet many reports described sunlight filtering through the trees, blue skies above, perfect conditions, as though whatever attracted the dogs required visibility, as though the animals needed to see something. By the early 1960s, local conversations had begun to change. The bridge was no longer merely a scenic landmark. It had become a source of unease. Dog owners exchanged stories, residents shared warnings. Visitors arriving with pets were quietly advised to keep them on short leashes, not because anyone understood the danger, because nobody did, and uncertainty is often more frightening than knowledge. One account from the late 1960s became particularly memorable among locals. A family was crossing the bridge with their dog during an afternoon walk. The animal suddenly stopped moving. It stood motionless, its ears pointed forward, its gaze fixed beyond the parapet. The family attempted to encourage it to continue walking. The dog refused. It remained staring at the gorge below. Minutes passed. The animal appeared completely captivated. Then, without warning, it broke into motion, not away from the edge, toward it. The dog launched itself over the wall before anyone could react. Witnesses later described the scene with visible discomfort, not because of the fall, because of what happened beforehand. The staring, the stillness, the strange sense that the dog was observing something invisible, something hidden from human eyes. By the 1970s, reports had become difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Too many incidents shared too many similarities. Patterns began emerging. Most of the dogs were long-nosed breeds known for their powerful sense of smell. Many jumped from the same section of the bridge. Nearly all appeared calm immediately beforehand, and almost every witness described an unsettling transformation, a moment when the dog's attention shifted completely, a moment when the animal seemed to become aware of something its owner could not perceive, Some witnesses described the dogs as entering a trance-like state. Others rejected that interpretation but struggled to find better words. How do you explain a healthy animal suddenly ignoring commands? How do you explain a loyal companion acting as though its owner no longer exists? How do you explain a creature behaving as if it hears a voice no one else can hear? The bridge itself offered few clues. Its stone parapet stood higher than most dogs could easily see over. The gorge below remained partially concealed from view. Dense vegetation covered much of the drop. From a practical perspective, many researchers later argued that dogs may have been attracted by scents drifting upward from the ravine. But for decades, witnesses lacked such explanations. All they had were their memories. And those memories continued haunting them, again and again. They described the same disturbing impression. The dogs did not appear to be running toward danger. They appeared to be moving towards something they wanted, as though a destination existed beyond the edge. As though the drop itself was not what captured their attention, as though something beyond the drop was calling them. As stories accumulated, local folklore began attaching itself to the mystery. Old tales resurfaced, stories about the land, stories about spirits, stories about thin places where the boundary between worlds became fragile. Most people dismissed such ideas, at least publicly. Yet even skeptics admitted one uncomfortable fact: the witness accounts were genuinely strange. People from different decades, different backgrounds, different beliefs, described remarkably similar experiences. Many had never heard previous stories before witnessing an incident themselves. Yet they often used the same language. The dog stared, the dog paused, the dog focused, the dog jumped, not randomly, not chaotically, purposefully. And perhaps that is what transformed the mystery from tragic to terrifying. Accidents can be understood, accidents can be explained, but purpose implies intention. Purpose suggests a goal, a destination, a reason. And if these dogs truly believed they were moving towards something, then what exactly did they think was waiting for them below? That question began forming during the earliest years of the mystery. It lingered through the decades that followed. It remains unanswered today, because somewhere among the first reports, hidden beneath witness testimony and fading memories, lies the detail that continues to unsettle investigators. The dogs did not act as though they were fleeing danger. They acted as though they were answering an invitation, and whatever was inviting them has never stopped. Most mysteries become less frightening the closer you examine them. Patterns emerge, variables reveal themselves, the unknown gradually transforms into the understood. The mystery of Overtoun Bridge does the opposite, because the closer investigators looked, the stranger it became. When the reports first began accumulating during the second half of the 20th century, many people assumed the incidents were scattered across the bridge. That would have made sense. A frightened animal might jump from any location. A distracted dog could lose its footing anywhere. An accident has no preference. An accident does not choose. But Overtoun Bridge appeared to choose, again. And again, and again. As local records expanded and witness accounts multiplied, a deeply unsettling pattern emerged. The dogs were not jumping from random locations. They were not leaping from multiple points along the parapet. They were not falling from whichever section happened to be nearest. Instead, an extraordinary number of incidents were concentrated around the same area, the same side, the same stretch of stone, the same section of parapet overlooking the gorge below. At first, the pattern seemed impossible. Surely memory was distorting the reports. Surely witnesses were unconsciously altering details after hearing previous stories. Yet the more investigators examined the accounts, the harder the pattern became to dismiss. Owners who had never met one another described nearly identical locations. Witnesses separated by decades pointed to the same section of bridge. Local residents who had observed multiple incidents reported the same thing. The dogs always seemed drawn toward a particular area, a place that, at first glance, looked no different from the rest of the structure. And perhaps that is what makes it so disturbing. There is no obvious marker, no unusual symbol carved into the stone, no damaged section of wall, no visible feature that immediately attracts attention. To an ordinary visitor, it appears completely unremarkable, just another section of weathered Victorian masonry. Yet countless witnesses insist that something changes when dogs approach it, not the bridge, the dogs. Imagine standing there on a quiet afternoon. The wind moves gently through the surrounding trees. The ancient stones beneath your feet are cool and damp from Scotland's perpetual moisture. The gorge stretches below, hidden beneath layers of vegetation and shadow. Nothing appears threatening, nothing appears extraordinary. Tourists walk across the bridge every year without noticing anything unusual. Photographers capture images of its elegant architecture. Visitors admire the view. Life continues normally. Then a dog arrives, perhaps a retriever, perhaps a collie, perhaps a spaniel. The breed hardly matters. The pattern remains the same. The animal walks calmly beside its owner. Its tail sways gently. Its attention drifts between scents carried on the breeze. Everything appears perfectly ordinary. Then it reaches the location, not an exact stone identified by a plaque, not a dramatic landmark, just a particular section of the right-hand parapet, and something changes. Witnesses often struggle to describe what they see. The transformation is subtle. The dog does not suddenly become aggressive. It does not bark wildly. It does not appear frightened. Instead, it becomes focused. Its attention narrows. The world around it seems to disappear. Commands lose meaning. Distractions lose meaning. Even the presence of its owner appears to fade into the background. The dog becomes interested in something else, something beyond the edge. One witness described the change as watching someone become lost in thought. Another compared it to seeing a person recognize a familiar face in a crowd. Several owners independently used a similar phrase. It was as though the dog had noticed something. The problem, of course, is that nobody else could see what that something was. As reports accumulated, investigators began studying the bridge more carefully. Measurements were taken, photographs were analyzed, environmental factors were examined. Researchers wanted to understand why one location seemed to attract so many incidents. The results only deepened the mystery. The bridge itself spans a wooded gorge approximately 50 feet above rocky terrain. The parapets are constructed from solid stone and stand relatively high. In many places, a dog cannot easily see over them without lifting its head or approaching closely. This detail immediately raised questions. If visual attraction explained the jumps, why did the behavior remain concentrated in one area? Why not multiple locations? Why not the entire bridge? Why one specific section? Again and again, the same answer emerged. Nobody knew. As years passed, local residents became familiar with the pattern. Some could point directly toward the area without hesitation. Stories circulated among dog owners. Warnings were quietly exchanged. Keep your dog on a leash. Do not let it wander. Pay attention near that section. That section. The words appeared repeatedly. Not the bridge. That part of the bridge. As though the location possessed its own identity, its own reputation, its own gravity. Perhaps the strangest detail emerged when investigators compared witness accounts separated by decades. People who had never met one another, people with different backgrounds, different professions, different beliefs, often described nearly identical behavior. The dog approaches. The dog slows. The dog pauses. The dog stares. The dog jumps. The sequence repeats with eerie consistency, almost like a ritual, almost like a program following predetermined instructions, almost like the animals are responding to the same stimulus every single time. And if that stimulus exists, it remains invisible to human observers. This is where the mystery begins to feel deeply uncomfortable. Because human beings are conditioned to search for causes, every effect must have an origin. Every action must have a reason. Yet Overtoun Bridge refuses to cooperate. The pattern is obvious. The explanation is not. The more precise the location becomes, the more difficult the mystery should be to sustain. A concentrated phenomenon ought to be easier to investigate, easier to solve, easier to understand. Instead, the opposite occurred. The precise location became one of the strongest arguments that something genuinely unusual was happening. Not necessarily supernatural, not necessarily paranormal, but unusual, enough to resist decades of explanation. Enough to attract researchers from multiple disciplines, enough to transform a local curiosity into an international mystery, because if the dogs were merely acting randomly, there should be no pattern. If accidents were responsible, there should be no consistency. If coincidence alone were at work, the incidents should scatter across the bridge. But they do not. The pattern remains. The same side, the same section, the same behavior, year after year, decade after decade, and perhaps the most unsettling detail is this: the bridge does not appear to pull every dog toward that location. Many cross safely, many show no unusual behavior whatsoever, which means that whatever influences the animals who stop there is selective. It chooses some and ignores others. Or perhaps some dogs notice something that others do not: a scent, a sound, a movement, a presence, something hidden within the landscape, something waiting beyond the limits of human perception. Whatever the explanation may be, witnesses often describe the same final moment. The dog reaches the parapet, the dog becomes still, the dog gazes downward, not with fear, not with confusion, but with recognition, as though it has finally found whatever it was searching for. And in those final seconds before the leap, owners often report an unsettling feeling, a feeling impossible to prove, a feeling impossible to measure, the sensation that their dog is looking at something, something real, something present, something standing somewhere below the bridge, waiting, patiently, exactly where it has always been, exactly where the dogs keep finding it, exactly where the mystery begins. If every dog that jumped from Overtoun Bridge had died, the mystery would already be disturbing. The reports would still exist, the witness accounts would still raise questions, the strange pattern would still defy easy explanation. But there is one detail that transforms the story from unsettling into genuinely terrifying. Some of the dogs survived. At first, that might sound like a fortunate outcome, a tragedy narrowly avoided, a second chance, a happy ending. Yet the stories of the survivors are, in many ways, more disturbing than the stories of the dogs that never came back, because survival created something investigators rarely have in mysteries like this: a continuation. A second chapter, an opportunity to observe what happened after the jump, and what happened afterward left owners, veterinarians, and witnesses struggling to understand what they were seeing. The gorge beneath Overtoun Bridge is unforgiving. The drop is approximately 50 feet. Below lies a landscape of jagged rocks, twisted roots, dense undergrowth, and hard earth. It is not the kind of place an animal should survive easily, yet some did. Broken bones, fractured ribs, deep cuts, internal injuries. Many required extensive veterinary treatment, others endured months of recovery. For their owners, the experience was traumatic enough. One moment they were enjoying a peaceful walk. The next, they were racing down steep woodland paths, scrambling through undergrowth, desperately searching for a beloved companion among rocks and shadows. Many described those moments as some of the worst of their lives. The panic, the confusion, the helplessness, the horrible uncertainty as they descended into the gorge below. Every second felt endless, every possibility felt catastrophic. And then, in some cases, they found their dogs alive, injured, terrified, but alive. Relief washed over them. The nightmare, they believed, was over. The mystery had already taken enough. At least their companion had survived, or so they thought, because in several reported cases, Something happened that transformed relief into fear. The dogs wanted to go back. Not weeks later, not years later, as soon as circumstances allowed. Veterinarians often observed a predictable response in animals that experience trauma. Dogs struck by vehicles may become fearful of roads. Animals injured in certain locations often avoid those places afterward. The experience creates a powerful negative association. Pain becomes a warning. Fear becomes protection. It is one of nature's most basic survival mechanisms. Yet some Overtoun Bridge survivors appeared to violate that expectation. According to numerous accounts repeated over the years, certain dogs that survived the fall later returned to the bridge and showed renewed interest in the same location. The same parapet, the same section of stone, the same area from which they had previously leapt. Imagine witnessing that. Imagine carrying your injured dog from the gorge below. Imagine the emergency treatment, the veterinary visits, the weeks of care, the sleepless nights spent worrying whether your companion will recover. Imagine finally bringing them home, watching them heal, watching them regain strength. Watching life slowly return to normal, then imagine returning to the bridge, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps because you refuse to let fear control your life, perhaps because part of you still needs answers, and then, as you approach the location where the incident occurred, your dog begins pulling toward it, not away from it, toward it, as though the memory of the fall means nothing, as though the pain never happened, as though something remains unfinished. For some owners, this was the moment the mystery became impossible to dismiss. A single jump could be explained, a scent, an accident, a momentary lapse of judgment. But a dog willingly returning to the same place after surviving such a traumatic event challenges ordinary assumptions about animal behavior. What could possibly override such a powerful survival instinct? What could convince an animal to ignore pain, ignore injury, ignore experience itself? The question haunted many of the people who witnessed it. One owner later described feeling physically ill while approaching the bridge again, not because of the location, because of the uncertainty, the fear of seeing the same behavior repeated, the fear of discovering that whatever had drawn the dog once was still there, still waiting, and for some, that fear proved justified. Several accounts describe dogs becoming unusually attentive when approaching the location where previous incidents occurred. The behavior often followed a familiar pattern. The dog would become quiet, focused, intent, its attention narrowing onto something beyond the parapet. Owners called their names. The dogs barely reacted. Leashes tightened. The animal strained forward. Not frantically, not aggressively, purposefully, as though moving toward a destination, as though responding to something only they could perceive. Many owners later admitted that these moments disturbed them more than the original jump, because now they knew what waited below. The dogs did too, or at least they should have. Yet the animals behaved as though the previous experience held no warning at all. Imagine standing there, your hands gripping the leash, your heart racing, your dog staring over the edge, the memory of broken bones and emergency treatment flooding your mind, and then realizing that if you released your grip for even a moment, the animal might try again. The psychological impact on owners cannot be overstated. For many, the experience left lasting emotional scars. Some refused to return to the bridge ever again. Others found themselves replaying the event repeatedly in their minds. The image of the jump became impossible to forget. The sound, the shock, the sudden disappearance, the horrible silence afterward. Several owners described feelings of guilt that persisted for years. They questioned every decision, every step, every moment leading up to the incident. Could they have prevented it? Should they have noticed something earlier? Was there a warning sign they missed? These questions lingered long after physical injuries healed. Because unlike most accidents, Overtoun Bridge rarely offers closure. There is no obvious explanation, no clear lesson, no simple answer, only uncertainty. And uncertainty has a unique way of feeding fear. the bridge becomes more than a location, it becomes a question that never stops asking itself. Why? Why there? Why that spot? Why that dog? Why did it jump? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why did it want to go back? For some owners, the experience fundamentally altered the way they viewed their animals. People often assume they understand their dogs. After all, dogs communicate constantly, through body language, behavior, emotion, routine. Owners spend years learning those signals, developing a bond built upon trust and familiarity. Then Overtoun Bridge shatters that confidence, because suddenly there is a moment when the owner no longer understands what their dog is thinking, a moment when the animal appears focused on something completely inaccessible to human perception, a moment when years of familiarity provide no answers whatsoever. Some owners described feeling excluded from their dog's experience, as though the animal had become aware of something they could never share, something visible only to it, something impossible to explain. That sensation lingers throughout many witness accounts, not fear of the bridge itself, fear of the unknown. Fear of realizing there may be aspects of reality animals perceive that humans cannot, and nowhere does that possibility feel more disturbing than at Overtoun Bridge, because the surviving dogs introduced a problem that remains unresolved. If the jumps resulted solely from curiosity, why return? If they resulted solely from scent, why risk everything again? If they resulted solely from accident, why revisit the exact location? The surviving dogs transformed the mystery. They complicated it, deepened it, made it harder to dismiss, harder to explain, harder to forget, because every survivor carried something back from the gorge, not an object, not evidence, not proof. Only a question reflected in the eyes of owners who watched their companions approach the parapet once more, a question that has echoed through decades of investigation. What was so compelling, so irresistible, so important, that even after surviving the fall, some dogs still seemed willing to answer the call a second time? And if something truly continues drawing them toward that edge, then perhaps the leap itself was never the destination, perhaps it was only the attempt to reach whatever waits beyond it. Most mysteries rely on stories. Stories can be exaggerated, memories can change, people misremember details, fear reshapes events, time distorts reality. That is why investigators often approach eyewitness testimony with caution. Human memory is imperfect. Human perception is flawed. People see what they expect to see. People remember what frightens them. People unconsciously fill gaps with assumptions. Ordinarily, that would make eyewitness accounts the weakest part of a mystery. At Overtoun Bridge, they may be the most disturbing part, because over the course of decades, hundreds of people who never met one another have described almost exactly the same thing, different years, different decades, different dogs, different owners, different backgrounds, different beliefs, yet their accounts echo one another with unnerving consistency, not word for word, not exactly, but close enough to make investigators pause, close enough to make skeptics uncomfortable, close enough to create the feeling that everyone may have witnessed different versions of the same event. It begins with normality. Almost every witness starts there. The walk was ordinary, the day was ordinary, the dog was ordinary, nothing seemed wrong, nothing felt unusual, the animal was behaving exactly as it always had, tail wagging, exploring scents, moving happily beside its owner. Then something changed. The descriptions become remarkably similar at this point. Owners often say the dog appeared to notice something, not hear something, not smell something, notice something. The distinction is subtle but important. Many witnesses struggle to explain why they chose that particular word. They simply felt it was the most accurate. The dog behaved as though it had suddenly become aware of a presence, aware of an object, aware of something deserving its complete attention. One owner later described the moment as watching a conversation begin. There was no visible second participant, no sound, no movement, yet the dog's behavior suggested an interaction was taking place. The animal's focus shifted completely, everything else became irrelevant. The bridge disappeared, the owner disappeared, the world disappeared, only the object of its attention remained. Several witnesses described calling their dogs repeatedly, again and again. The animals barely responded. Some did not respond at all. This detail appears throughout numerous accounts. Owners who had spent years training loyal, obedient pets suddenly found themselves unable to break the animals. Concentration. The dogs were not disobedient. They were absorbed, consumed, focused on something beyond the owner's understanding. One witness later admitted that the experience frightened him more than the jump itself. He described standing only a few feet away from his dog and feeling as though he no longer existed. The animal looked through him, past him, towards something else, something more important, something invisible. Again and again, the same description appears. The stare. Witnesses remember the stare, not because it lasted long, because of its intensity. Many owners reported that their dogs became motionless before jumping. Not frozen with fear, still with concentration. The dogs would approach the parapet, stop, and stare into the gorge below. Seconds passed, sometimes longer. The animals appeared to be observing something, tracking something, waiting for something. One woman later recalled that her dog stood perfectly still for nearly 10 seconds, an eternity under such circumstances. She watched the animal's eyes, watched its posture, watched its breathing. Everything about the dog suggested curiosity, not terror, not panic, curiosity, as though it had discovered something fascinating beyond the edge. Then it jumped. The memory haunted her for years. Because she could never shake one particular feeling, the feeling that her dog had seen something, not imagined something, seen something. Another witness described a similar experience decades earlier. He recalled noticing a strange expression on his dog's face moments before the leap. Not excitement, not aggression, recognition, as though the animal had found something familiar, something expected, something it had been searching for. He later admitted that this interpretation made no logical sense, yet it remained the closest description he could provide. Recognition. The word appears repeatedly throughout witness testimony. Recognition, interest, focus, attention. These are not the words people usually associate with frightened animals, and that inconsistency lies at the heart of the mystery. Because frightened animals run away, these dogs move toward the edge. Several owners reported feeling a sudden sense of unease in the seconds before the jump. Not because they noticed anything unusual around them, because they noticed something unusual about their dog, a subtle shift, a change in demeanor, a transformation that felt impossible to explain. One owner later said it was like watching a friend become distracted by someone standing behind you. You cannot see the person, you cannot hear them, yet your friend clearly can. The dog behaved as though it was sharing the bridge with something unseen, not necessarily supernatural, not necessarily paranormal, simply unseen. That distinction matters, because many of the witnesses were not believers in ghosts. They were not paranormal investigators. They were ordinary people. Teachers, workers, parents, retirees, people who arrived expecting nothing unusual. Many openly rejected supernatural explanations, yet their descriptions often sounded remarkably similar. The consistency itself became part of the mystery. Investigators reviewing accounts from different decades noticed recurring themes. The dog becomes quiet. The dog becomes focused. The dog stares. The dog ignores commands. The dog approaches the parapet. The dog jumps, again and again. The sequence repeats, like a pattern etched into the history of the bridge, like a script being followed by different animals across generations. One of the most unsettling accounts came from an owner who arrived at Overtoun Bridge having already heard the stories. Determined not to be influenced by folklore, she kept her dog on a short leash. She watched carefully, She expected nothing unusual. Then her dog reached the infamous section of parapet. Immediately, the animal's attention changed. Its ears shifted forward. Its body became tense. Its gaze fixed beyond the wall. The owner later described feeling a sudden wave of dread, not because of anything she saw. Because of the dog's expression, the animal appeared fascinated, almost entranced, as though someone had whispered its name. She tightened her grip on the leash and pulled the dog away before anything could happen. Years later, she still remembered the look in its eyes. Not fear, not confusion, expectation, as though it had been waiting for something, as though something had been waiting for it. Perhaps the most disturbing witness accounts come from those who insist the dogs looked happy. Happy. The word feels wrong in this context, yet it appears repeatedly. Owners describing animals that showed no distress whatsoever, no hesitation, no warning signs, no visible struggle. Only an intense interest in whatever lay beyond the parapet. Imagine standing beside a beloved companion, a creature you know better than almost anyone, a creature whose moods and habits have become familiar over years of companionship. Then imagine realizing that for a few brief seconds, the animal is experiencing something completely beyond your understanding, something you cannot perceive, something you cannot interrupt, something you cannot share. The dog sees it, the dog responds to it, the dog moves toward it, and you are left standing helplessly beside a mystery. That feeling echoes through nearly every witness account associated with Overtoun Bridge. Not certainty, not proof, not evidence of anything supernatural, only helplessness, the helplessness of watching something happen without understanding why, the helplessness of realizing your companion may be reacting to a stimulus entirely beyond human perception, the helplessness of knowing that if there is something there, something drawing their attention, something inspiring such powerful fascination, then whatever it is remains hidden, because despite decades of witnesses, despite countless interviews, despite investigations and studies, no one has ever reported seeing what the dogs appeared to see. Only the reaction, only the stare, only the impossible concentration, and perhaps that is what makes the witness account so unsettling. Not that they tell us what happened, but that they don't. They all end at exactly the same place, at the edge of understanding, at the moment the dogs become aware of something, at the moment they focus on it, at the moment they seem to recognize it. And just before the leap, whatever captures their attention remains hidden, unidentified, unseen, waiting somewhere beyond the limits of human sight, exactly where it has always been. Every great mystery eventually attracts the same adversary, not priests, not ghost hunters, not folklore, science. For decades, Overtoun Bridge existed in a strange limbo between local legend and documented reality. The stories spread from one generation to the next. Newspapers reported the incidents. Television programs discussed the phenomenon. Visitors arrived hoping to see the infamous location for themselves. Dog owners whispered warnings before crossing. Residents debated explanations. Yet despite all the attention, one crucial problem remained. Nobody had properly investigated the bridge, not in a controlled, scientific way. The stories were real, the reports were real, the witnesses were real, but stories alone cannot solve a mystery. Stories create questions, science searches for answers, and by the early 2000s, the mystery of Overtoun Bridge had become impossible to ignore. Hundreds of reported incidents, decades of eyewitness testimony, the same location, the same behavior, the same unanswered questions. Something was happening. Whether the explanation proved ordinary or extraordinary, researchers wanted evidence, not speculation, not folklore, evidence. Finally, in 2006, a team of animal behavior experts arrived to examine the bridge. For many observers, this was the moment the mystery would finally end. After all, the phenomenon involved animals. Animal behavior specialists study animals, If anyone could explain the strange events, surely it would be them. The investigators approached the bridge with a simple philosophy: strip away the legends, ignore the ghost stories, set aside the supernatural theories, focus only on observable facts. What could physically influence a dog's behavior at this location? What environmental factors existed? What sensory stimuli might be affecting the animals? What made this particular section of bridge different from everywhere else? These were the questions science intended to answer. The investigation began with something surprisingly simple: observation. Researchers walked the bridge repeatedly. They examined the parapets, measured sight lines, studied the surrounding geography. They descended into the gorge below, explored the undergrowth, surveyed the terrain, documented animal activity, recorded environmental conditions. Every detail mattered, because mysteries often hide inside overlooked details. Something small, something subtle, something everyone else missed. The investigators understood that dogs experience the world very differently from humans. People rely primarily on sight. Dogs rely heavily on scent. What appears insignificant to us may be overwhelming to them. A single odor can communicate information humans cannot even imagine. A scent trail invisible to human senses may be as obvious to a dog as a brightly illuminated road. This realization shaped much of the investigation. Instead of asking what people experienced on the bridge, researchers asked what dogs experienced. The difference was crucial. The team began examining the wildlife inhabiting the gorge beneath Overtoun Bridge. Immediately, they discovered something interesting. The ravine supported populations of various small mammals, mice, squirrels, and most importantly, mink. At first glance, mink seemed irrelevant, small, semi-aquatic. Predators rarely inspire international mysteries, yet animal behavior experts knew something important. Mink produce a powerful scent. To humans, it is largely unnoticed. To dogs, it can be extraordinarily attractive. Particularly to hunting breeds and dogs with strong prey drives, the discovery offered the first genuinely promising lead in decades. Researchers expanded their investigation. Additional environmental surveys were conducted. Wildlife activity was documented. The gorge was examined more carefully, and the deeper they looked, the more the scent hypothesis appeared plausible. Then came one of the most important stages of the study: controlled testing. Researchers introduced dogs to scent samples collected from various animals inhabiting the area. The results were revealing. Many dogs displayed strong interest in mink's scent, far stronger interest than they showed towards several other local animals. The reaction was immediate, focused, intense. For the first time, investigators possessed a potential explanation capable of accounting for at least part of the mystery. Perhaps the dogs were not responding to anything supernatural. Perhaps they were simply following an irresistible scent. Perhaps the mystery was not a mystery at all. Yet even at this stage, certain details remained uncomfortable. Because while the scent theory explained attraction, it did not automatically explain the jumps. A dog becoming interested in a smell is normal. A dog launching itself from a 50-foot bridge is not. Researchers therefore continued gathering data. The physical structure of the bridge became increasingly important. Particularly the parapets. Unlike many modern bridges, Overtoun Bridge features high stone walls. From a dog's perspective, visibility is limited. In several areas, an animal cannot easily see the drop below. This detail generated a new hypothesis. Perhaps the bridge created a visual illusion. Perhaps a dog approaching the parapet could smell an animal beneath it without fully understanding the danger beyond the wall. Perhaps the scent triggered curiosity. The structure concealed the drop, and the result was a tragic accident. The theory was elegant, simple, rational. Most importantly, it required no supernatural explanations. Many scientists considered it highly convincing. Many journalists agreed. The story quickly spread through newspapers and documentaries. Headlines announced that the mystery had finally been solved. Animal behavior experts had identified the cause. The bridge was not haunted. The land was not cursed. The dogs were reacting to scent. Case closed. For a brief moment, it appeared that decades of speculation had finally reached a conclusion. Yet mysteries are rarely so cooperative, because even as the study gained attention, certain questions refused to disappear, questions that emerged not from folklore but from the data itself. Investigators noticed that the majority of reported jumps still occurred from a remarkably specific section of the bridge. If scent alone explained the behavior, why that exact location? Why not the entire structure? Why not multiple areas? Why such consistency? The pattern remained. The same side, the same parapet, the same narrow stretch of stone. Researchers acknowledged the complexity. Environmental conditions likely varied. Wind patterns influenced scent distribution. Geography affected airflow. The bridge's architecture may have concentrated odors in specific areas. These explanations were possible, perhaps even probable, yet they remained difficult to verify with absolute certainty. And then there was another complication: the witness accounts. Decades of witness accounts, the reports describing dogs becoming strangely focused, the reports describing prolonged staring, the reports describing animals ignoring commands, the reports describing behavior that many owners found deeply unusual. Science could explain attraction. Could it explain every aspect of the behavior? That question lingered, quietly, uncomfortably, like a shadow at the edge of a brightly lit room. The investigators had accomplished something important. They had provided the first evidence-based explanation in the history of the mystery. That achievement mattered. It moved the conversation beyond pure speculation. It introduced measurable factors, observable factors, testable factors, and for many people, that was enough. The mystery had been solved, at least partially, at least scientifically, but for others, the investigation created a different feeling entirely, not because the findings were unconvincing, because they were convincing. And yet the bridge still felt strange, the report still felt strange, the witness account still felt strange. Something about the story remained unresolved. Something about the pattern refused to sit comfortably within the explanation. And over the years that followed, as new incidents continued to occur, those lingering questions would grow louder, because science had finally arrived at Overtoun Bridge. Science had collected data. Science had examined the evidence. Science had proposed an answer, yet the bridge remained, the gorge remained, the witnesses remained, and perhaps most importantly of all, the jumps remained, which meant that the scientific investigation had not ended the mystery. It had merely begun a new chapter in it. For decades, Overtoun Bridge existed in the uncomfortable space between fact and folklore. Too many incidents have been documented to dismiss the story entirely. Too few answers existed to explain it. The result was a mystery that seemed to grow larger every year. New witnesses appeared. New reports emerged. New theories spread. Some people blamed the landscape. Others blamed the bridge itself. Others looked toward ancient folklore and whispered about thin places, spirits, and unseen presences lurking beneath the gorge. Then, in 2006, science finally offered an answer, a real answer, a measurable answer, an answer grounded not in mythology, but in biology, for many observers. It was exactly what they had been waiting for, because after decades of uncertainty, the explanation seemed surprisingly simple. The dogs were not responding to ghosts. The dogs were not responding to supernatural forces. The dogs were responding to mink. At first, the idea sounds almost disappointing. After years of speculation, after countless stories and documentaries, after generations of mystery, the answer appeared to be a small semi-aquatic predator living among the undergrowth below the bridge. Yet many scientific explanations feel disappointing at first. Reality often lacks the dramatic flair of folklore. Lightning is less romantic than angry gods. disease is less exciting than curses. And perhaps a powerful scent is less thrilling than a doorway between worlds, but science is not concerned with excitement, science is concerned with evidence, and the evidence appeared compelling. During their investigation, animal behavior experts studied the wildlife inhabiting the gorge beneath Overtoun Bridge. Among the species identified were mice, squirrels, and mink. Of these animals, one stood out immediately: the mink. Mink possess scent glands that produce strong odors used for communication and territorial marking. To humans, these scents are often subtle or entirely unnoticed. To dogs, they can be extraordinarily powerful. A dog's sense of smell is estimated to be tens of thousands of times more sensitive than a human's. The world experienced by a dog is fundamentally different from the world experienced by us. Humans navigate through vision, dogs navigate through scent. An odor invisible to human awareness can dominate a dog's entire attention. A trail hours old can be followed like a visible road. A hidden animal can be detected long before it is seen. For animal behavior experts, this fact became central to the investigation. If powerful mink odors were drifting upward from the gorge below, they could potentially attract dogs with remarkable intensity. Researchers tested this idea. Controlled scent trials were conducted. Dogs were exposed to various animal scents associated with the area. Again and again, many showed a particularly strong interest in mink. The response was immediate, focused, persistent. Some dogs appeared almost obsessed with locating the source. To scientists, this was an important breakthrough. For the first time, a specific environmental factor appeared capable of explaining why dogs might become unusually interested in the area surrounding the bridge. But scent alone was not enough. The real challenge involved understanding why attraction could become fatal. This is where the bridge's architecture entered the equation. Overtoun Bridge differs from many modern structures. Its stone parapets are unusually high, from a dog's perspective. Visibility beyond the wall is limited. The gorge below is not immediately obvious. The drop remains concealed until the animal approaches the edge. Scientists proposed a straightforward sequence of events. A dog crossing the bridge detects a powerful scent drifting upward from the ravine. The scent triggers curiosity and hunting instincts. The dog moves toward the source. The high parapet obscures the danger beyond. The animal attempts to investigate. The result is a tragic fall. Suddenly, decades of mystery seemed understandable. No spirits, no curses, no supernatural entities, just a combination of scent, instinct, architecture, and unfortunate circumstances. The theory possessed everything scientists value. It was testable, it was measurable, it was consistent with known animal behavior. Most importantly, it relied on mechanisms already understood by biology. No extraordinary assumptions were required. No unknown forces needed to be invoked. The mystery appeared solved. News organizations quickly embraced the explanation. Headlines across Britain and beyond reported the findings. Articles described how researchers had finally identified the cause behind the infamous dog jumps. Television programs presented the study as the long-awaited solution. For many members of the public, the case was effectively closed. After all, the explanation made sense. Dogs are driven by scent. Mink produce powerful odors. The bridge creates unusual conditions. The mystery ends. At least, that is what many people believed, and to be fair, there were good reasons to believe it. The theory addressed several major questions. It explained why dogs were disproportionately involved. Humans lacked the olfactory sensitivity necessary to experience the same attraction. It explained why certain breeds appeared overrepresented. Long-nosed hunting breeds often possess especially strong scent-tracking instincts. It explained why incidents tended to occur under specific environmental conditions. Wind patterns could influence odor concentration. Clear weather could alter airflow. The bridge's design could funnel scents toward particular areas. The explanation seemed not merely plausible, It seemed elegant, a puzzle solved through careful observation, a triumph of scientific investigation over superstition. Many researchers considered it one of the strongest examples of how seemingly paranormal phenomena can emerge from entirely natural causes. Yet beneath the confidence, certain uncomfortable details remained, details that were easy to overlook while celebrating a solution, details that would become increasingly important in the years ahead, because while the mink theory explained attraction, it did not necessarily explain intensity. Witnesses consistently described dogs displaying an extraordinary level of focus, a degree of concentration that many owners found unusual. The animals often ignored commands, ignored distractions, ignored familiar voices. Their attention narrowed onto something beyond the parapet with startling determination. Could scent alone account for that behavior? Perhaps. Many scientists believed so, but not everyone was convinced. Then there was the question of location. The majority of incidents continued clustering around the same section of bridge. If mink odors were present throughout the gorge, why did one area seem particularly significant? Researchers proposed several possibilities: wind currents, landscape contours, vegetation patterns. All were reasonable suggestions. Yet none could be demonstrated with complete certainty, and certainty matters in mysteries like this, because uncertainty leaves room for doubt. The greatest strength of the mink theory was also its greatest weakness. It explained enough to sound convincing, enough to satisfy many observers, enough to dominate public discussion, but not enough to silence every question. Still, for several years, the scientific explanation remained the dominant narrative. Visitors arrived at Overtoun Bridge believing they understood the mystery. Guidebooks repeated the findings, documentaries referenced the study, journalists cited the conclusions. The case appeared settled. The bridge had been demystified. The strange phenomenon had been reduced to scent trails and animal instinct. The unknown had become known, at least on paper. Yet mysteries do not care about paperwork. Mysteries do not care about headlines. Mysteries do not care about public consensus. And in the years that followed, something deeply inconvenient happened. The dogs kept jumping, not occasionally, not rarely, regularly. The reports continued, the witness accounts continued, the same behaviors continued, the same location continued, the same questions continued, and with every new incident, a disturbing possibility emerged. What if the mink theory was correct, but incomplete? What if it explained part of the mystery rather than all of it? What if science had identified one piece of the puzzle while overlooking another? Because despite the confidence surrounding the official explanation, Overtoun Bridge remained exactly what it had always been, a place where healthy dogs still walked calmly toward the same section of stone, a place where witnesses still reported the same strange sequence of events. A place where answers never seemed to remain comfortable for very long. And as new reports began accumulating after the study's publication, the greatest challenge facing the mink theory became impossible to ignore. The explanation existed, the evidence existed, the conclusions existed, yet so did the mystery, and the bridge appeared determined to keep both alive. Mysteries are supposed to end. That is how stories work. A question is asked, an answer is found, the unknown becomes known, the fear dissolves, people move on. That is what should have happened at Overtoun Bridge. By 2006, scientists had conducted their investigation. Animal behavior experts had examined the evidence. A plausible explanation had emerged. The media embraced it. The public largely accepted it. The infamous mystery of the dog bridge appeared solved. For a brief moment, it seemed as though decades of speculation had finally reached their conclusion. The bridge had been explained. The dogs were reacting to scent. The case was closed, except it wasn't. Because Overtoun Bridge refused to behave like a solved mystery, the reports did not stop, the stories did not disappear, the warnings did not fade, and perhaps most importantly of all, the dogs did not stop jumping. At first, many people assumed that new incidents simply represented the lingering effects of old folklore. The bridge had become famous. Visitors arrived already aware of its reputation. Every unusual event attracted attention. Every accident generated headlines. Surely that explained why reports continued appearing. Yet as the years passed, something uncomfortable became clear. The pattern itself remained unchanged, not slightly changed, not approximately changed. Unchanged, dogs were still approaching the same section of bridge, still displaying the same unusual focus, still ignoring commands, still moving toward the same parapet, still jumping. The official explanation existed, yet the phenomenon continued almost as if nothing had happened. Imagine solving a crime only to discover the crime continues occurring exactly as before. Imagine diagnosing a problem only to watch the symptoms persist. That was the uncomfortable position many observers found themselves in. The explanation made sense. The evidence supporting it was legitimate, yet reality refused to cooperate, and every new incident raised the same unsettling question. If the mystery had truly been solved, why did it feel unsolved? Several cases occurring after the scientific investigation became particularly troubling for those who followed the story closely, not because they disproved the mink theory, because they complicated it. One owner described arriving at the bridge years after the study had been published. She was aware of the bridge's reputation, aware of the investigation, aware of the scientific explanation. She kept her dog close, watched carefully, expected nothing unusual. Then the animal's behavior changed. The dog became intensely focused on the familiar section of parapet. It ignored attempts to redirect its attention, ignored commands, ignored distractions. The owner later recalled feeling an overwhelming sense of unease, not because she believed in ghosts, because the behavior matched decades of witness testimony with disturbing precision. The dog appeared fascinated, captivated, drawn towards something beyond the edge. The story ended without tragedy because the owner intervened, yet the experience left her deeply unsettled. The scientific explanation remained possible, but standing therein, person, watching the behavior unfold, certainty suddenly felt more difficult. Then there were the reports that emerged from local residents, people familiar with the bridge, people who had watched the mystery evolve over decades. Many noted the same thing. The jumps continued at a rate that felt strangely consistent. The study had generated headlines. The explanation had spread internationally, yet the bridge itself appeared unaffected. Whatever process was occurring there had not changed. The same patterns persisted. The same stories returned, again, and again, and again. This is where contradictions began accumulating. Not dramatic contradictions, subtle ones, the kind that slowly erode confidence. The kind that transform certainty into doubt. Consider the weather. Over the years, witnesses repeatedly reported incidents occurring on clear days, bright days, calm days, days with good visibility. This detail appears frequently throughout the history of the bridge. If scent alone were responsible, weather conditions should certainly influence behavior, but many observers found themselves wondering why so many reports seemed to cluster around pleasant conditions rather than extreme ones. The pattern felt strange, not impossible, just strange. Then there was the issue of concentration. The dogs often appeared extraordinarily focused before jumping, owners repeatedly described. Animals becoming absorbed by something beyond the parapet. The behavior frequently lasted several seconds, sometimes longer. The dog stared, waited, observed, as though something held their attention. Supporters of the scientific explanation argued that scent can produce powerful behavioral responses, and they were correct. It can, but some witnesses continued struggling with what they had personally observed, because what they remembered felt less like scent tracking and more like visual attention, less like following an odor and more like watching something. Again, this did not disprove the official explanation. It simply created tension between observation and interpretation. A Gap, a space where uncertainty continued living. Then came one of the most frequently discussed contradictions: the location, the infamous location, the same section of bridge that had appeared throughout decades of reports. If mink existed throughout the gorge, why did incidents continue concentrating so heavily around a particular area? Researchers proposed airflow patterns, wind channels, landscape effects, architectural features, all plausible, all possible, yet no explanation completely eliminated the question: why there? Why that exact stretch of stone? Why not everywhere? The bridge itself seemed unwilling to answer. And then came the stories that reignited international attention, stories involving dogs that had never displayed unusual behavior before, dogs with no history of aggression, no history of anxiety, no history of unpredictability, animals described by owners as calm, affectionate, and entirely ordinary. These accounts proved particularly powerful because they mirrored reports from decades earlier. The same sequence unfolded, the same behavior appeared, the same mystery repeated itself. Perhaps the most chilling modern account involved a dog that approached the infamous area and paused, not briefly, not for a moment, for several long seconds. The owner stood nearby, close enough to intervene, close enough to observe every detail. The dog stared. Over the edge, motionless, focused, watching. Witnesses later described the pause as deeply unsettling. The animal did not appear frightened, did not appear confused, did not appear distressed. It appeared interested. The distinction mattered, because interest suggests attraction, interest suggests curiosity, interest suggests the presence of something worth observing. Then the dog jumped. The incident quickly became another chapter in the growing history of the bridge. Another report, another witness, another story joining decades of similar stories. And with every new account, the same contradiction resurfaced. The explanation existed, the behavior remained. One would expect a solved mystery to become less mysterious over time. Overtoun Bridge became more mysterious, not because evidence disappeared, because evidence accumulated. The more reports emerged, the more difficult it became to separate folklore from observation, scientific explanation from personal experience, rationality from unease. People visiting the bridge often found themselves caught between two competing realities. The first reality was straightforward. The dogs detected scent. The bridge's structure concealed danger. The resulting accidents, while tragic, were natural. The second reality was emotional, experiential, human. The reality described by witnesses. The reality of standing beside a beloved animal and watching its attention become consumed by something invisible. The reality of seeing a dog stare into empty space with unsettling concentration. The reality of feeling that the animal was responding to something you could not perceive. Neither reality completely erased the other. Instead, they coexisted, and in the space between them, the mystery survived. That survival may be the most fascinating aspect of Overtoun Bridge. Not the jumps themselves, not the folklore, not even the scientific investigation, the survival of uncertainty. Because uncertainty is remarkably resilient, it persists even in the presence of evidence. It survives alongside explanations. It grows strongest where facts and experiences fail to align perfectly. And nowhere is that more apparent than at Overtoun Bridge, a place where science may have identified a cause. A place where witnesses continue reporting strange behavior, a place where answers exist, yet somehow never feel complete. The bridge remains, the gorge remains, the stories remain, and every time another dog approaches that section of stone, pauses, and stares into the ravine below, the same uncomfortable possibility returns. Perhaps the mystery was never truly solved. Perhaps it was merely explained. And sometimes those are not the same thing, because an explanation tells us how something might happen. A mystery asks why it keeps happening. And after all these years, Overtoun Bridge continues asking that question. without ever revealing the answer. Every mystery creates a vacuum, and human beings have always filled vacuums with stories. When answers fail to arrive, imagination steps forward. When evidence reaches its limits, folklore takes over. When fear has nowhere else to go, it settles into legend. For decades, Overtoun Bridge existed at the crossroads of fact and folklore. The documented incidents were real. The witness accounts were real. The investigations were real, but alongside those documented events, another history began to grow, a darker history, a hidden history, a collection of whispers passed between locals, visitors, paranormal investigators, and those who believed there was something beneath the bridge that science had never found. Something unseen, something ancient, something waiting. No one can prove such stories. No one has ever captured evidence of a supernatural presence beneath Overtoun Bridge, yet the legends endure, and like all enduring legends, they reveal something important, not necessarily about reality, but about fear, because the stories people tell often reflect the things they are most afraid might be true. Long before the bridge was constructed, local folklore described the surrounding land as unusual. The forests were older than memory, the hills carried ancient histories, the gorge itself seemed to swallow sound. Even today, visitors occasionally remark upon an odd sensation while standing near the ravine. Not fear, not panic, something more subtle, the feeling of being observed, the feeling that the landscape is somehow aware of them. Rationally, such sensations can be explained. Human psychology is remarkably susceptible to suggestion. An isolated environment combined with a notorious reputation can influence perception, yet folklore rarely concerns itself with psychology. Folklore concerns itself with meaning. And according to local legends, the gorge beneath Overtoun Bridge was never empty. Some stories describe it as a place where spirits lingered, not malevolent spirits, not demons, simply entities unable or unwilling to leave, figures caught between worlds, presences trapped within the landscape. According to these tales, certain individuals were more sensitive than others: children, animals, the elderly, those closest to the boundaries of life and death. The old stories claimed these people occasionally sensed things that others could not: shapes moving through trees, voices carried on windless afternoons, footsteps where no person stood, a presence standing just beyond sight, waiting, watching. The details changed with each generation. The feeling remained the same. Something inhabited the place, something that preferred not to be seen. As decades passed and reports of the dog jumps accumulated, those old legends found new life. People began connecting unrelated stories. Ancient folklore merged with modern mystery. The result was a theory both simple and terrifying. What if the dogs were not reacting to a scent? What if they were reacting to a presence? The idea spread quickly among paranormal enthusiasts. Dogs have long occupied a special place in supernatural folklore. Across countless cultures, they are said to perceive things hidden from human senses. Some traditions claim dogs can see spirits. Others claim they can sense approaching death. Throughout history, stories have emerged describing animals staring into empty rooms, barking at invisible corners, or reacting to unseen visitors. Most such accounts can likely be explained through ordinary means. Yet the belief persists, because it touches upon a deeply unsettling possibility. What if animals truly experience reality differently than we do? What if they notice things we overlook? And what if Overtoun Bridge represents an extreme example of that difference? Among paranormal investigators, one theory became particularly famous: the thin place theory. According to this belief, the bridge stands atop a location where the boundary between worlds is unusually weak, the living world on one side, something else on the other, not necessarily heaven, not necessarily hell, simply somewhere beyond, a place humanity was never meant to fully understand. Supporters of this theory point toward the ancient Celtic traditions associated with the land. They point toward the strange behavior of the dogs, they point toward witness descriptions, the staring, the focus, the apparent fascination. To believers, these details suggest the animals are observing something beyond human perception, something visible only to them, something standing beneath the bridge, waiting in the gorge below. Another legend describes a figure known locally by various names: the White Lady, the Woman in the Mist, the Silent Mourner. Descriptions vary dramatically. Some accounts describe a pale female figure wandering among the trees, others speak of a shape standing near the water at the bottom of the ravine. A few stories claim she appears only at dawn or dusk. Partially obscured by drifting fog, there is no evidence supporting such sightings, no photographs, no verified encounters, only stories. Yet the stories continue, generation after generation, retold beside fireplaces, shared among visitors, repeated in documentaries. Like all enduring ghost stories, the details matter less than the emotion they create, the sense that someone may be standing below, watching. A far darker theory emerged in later years, one rarely discussed openly. A theory suggesting that whatever inhabits the gorge is not merely observed by the dogs, it communicates with them, not through words, not through sound, through attraction, through invitation. Through curiosity, supporters of this idea often point to witness descriptions. The dogs do not appear frightened, they do not appear threatened, they appear interested, drawn, compelled, as though they are being shown something wonderful, something irresistible, something worth reaching. In this version of the legend, the bridge itself becomes a lure, a threshold, a place where whatever waits below can briefly make itself known, not to humans, to animals, to creatures whose senses operate beyond the limits of our own. Again, there is no evidence for such claims, only stories, only theories, only fear. Yet fear has remarkable staying power, especially when reality refuses to provide complete answers. Perhaps the most disturbing legend of all involves no specific entity whatsoever, no ghost, no spirit, no monster, only a presence, an intelligence, something ancient that exists beneath the bridge without shape or identity, something that occasionally notices when a living creature approaches, something curious, something patient, something that has remained in the same place for centuries. This theory terrifies many people precisely because it lacks detail. Monsters can be imagined, ghosts can be described, but an unknown presence remains undefined, and what remains undefined becomes limitless. It can become whatever the imagination fears most: a shadow, a voice, a face hidden among the trees, a pair of eyes staring upward from the gorge, or perhaps nothing visible at all, only the feeling that someone is there, the feeling that someone has always been there, listening, waiting, observing every dog that crosses the bridge, every owner, every witness, every investigator, patiently, silently, for generations. Of course, none of these legends prove anything. Folklore is not evidence. Stories are not proof. The existence of a legend does not make the legend true, yet there is a reason such stories survive, because Overtoun Bridge creates a peculiar kind of discomfort, not the fear of immediate danger, the fear of uncertainty. The fear of standing above a place that refuses to explain itself, the fear of looking into a gorge where hundreds of dogs have focused their attention, the fear of wondering whether they were responding to something ordinary, or something else. And perhaps that is why the folklore refuses to die, because every mystery eventually reaches a point where facts can go no further. Beyond that point lies speculation. Beyond speculation lies legend, and beyond legend lies the oldest fear of all, the fear that something may be looking back from the darkness, not because anyone has seen it, not because anyone can prove it exists, but because generation after generation continues to ask the same question. If there is truly nothing beneath Overtoun Bridge, then why does it feel as though there should be? There is a reason the mystery of Overtoun Bridge unsettles people more deeply than most unsolved cases. It is not because of the bridge. It is not because of the gorge. It is not even because of the dogs. It is because the mystery forces us to confront a possibility that most of us rarely consider. What if reality is far larger than the tiny fraction we are capable of perceiving? Human beings often assume that what we experience is the world itself. We trust our eyes. We trust our ears. We trust our senses. We move through life believing that what we can see, hear, touch, and understand represents the complete picture. Yet science tells a very different story. The reality we experience is only a narrow slice of what actually exists around us. At this very moment, invisible radio waves pass through your body. Signals from satellites cross the sky above your head. Ultraviolet light floods the world around you. Magnetic fields stretch across continents. Countless sounds vibrate through the air beyond the range of human hearing. Entire dimensions of information exist around us every second, completely unnoticed. Not because they are hidden. Because we lack the ability to perceive them. Human senses evolved for survival, not for truth. We see only what we need to see, hear only what we need to hear, understand only what helped our ancestors survive. Everything else remains beyond our awareness, and that realization leads directly to a deeply unsettling question. What if other animals perceive aspects of reality that we cannot? Not supernatural realities, not paranormal dimensions, simply parts of the world that remain inaccessible to us. Consider the dog's nose. Humans experience scent as a minor detail, a background sensation. Dogs experience scent as an entire universe. A dog can identify individuals through odor alone. Track trails long after they become invisible, detect diseases, locate hidden animals, recognize emotional states. Interpret information carried on air currents that humans never notice. To a dog, the world is layered with invisible signals, a landscape of sense as rich and detailed as any visual environment. Imagine trying to explain color to someone born blind. Imagine trying to explain music to someone born deaf. Now imagine trying to explain the scent world of a dog to a human being. The gap in perception is enormous. A dog may be responding to information we literally cannot imagine, and nowhere does that possibility feel more relevant than at Overtoun Bridge. Because one explanation for the mystery is not that dogs see ghosts. It is that dogs perceive something entirely real that humans fail to notice, something ordinary, something natural, something hidden within the limitations of our own senses. Yet even that possibility becomes unsettling when examined closely, because if dogs are reacting to information unavailable to us, then we remain spectators to our own mystery, observers watching a reaction without understanding its cause. Witnesses standing beside an animal experiencing a completely different version of reality. The thought is strangely humbling, and strangely frightening. Throughout history, countless stories have emerged about animals sensing things before humans do, dogs becoming restless before earthquakes, birds changing behavior before storms, animals fleeing areas shortly before natural disasters. Scientists continue studying many of these phenomena. In some cases, explanations have emerged. Subtle vibrations, atmospheric changes, electromagnetic fluctuations, signals too weak for humans to notice, yet strong enough for animals to detect. What appears mysterious often becomes understandable once perception enters the equation. The animal is not seeing the future. The animal is detecting information humans cannot access. That distinction matters, because it raises another possibility. Perhaps the dogs at Overtoun Bridge are responding to something measurable, something physical, something present within the environment, something we simply have not identified. A scent, a sound, a vibration, an atmospheric condition, an environmental factor hidden beneath the threshold of human awareness. The bridge may not be mysterious because the dogs are behaving strangely. The bridge may be mysterious because humans remain blind to the stimulus influencing them, and yet there are moments when even this explanation begins to feel incomplete, because witnesses often describe something more than attraction. They describe focus, attention, concentration. The dogs do not merely notice something, they seem captivated by it. That distinction has inspired more speculative theories. Not supernatural theories, perception theories, ideas exploring the possibility that animals process information in ways fundamentally different from human cognition. Some researchers have suggested that dogs may integrate sensory information into experiences impossible for us to imagine. A combination of scent, sound, movement, environmental cues, and instinctive processing occurring simultaneously, the result might create an overwhelming perception of significance. Something that appears invisible to humans may feel overwhelmingly obvious to a dog. A scent trail, a hidden animal, a shifting current of air. The dog does not analyze it consciously, the dog simply knows. And perhaps that knowing becomes powerful enough to override caution, powerful enough to command attention, powerful enough to pull focus away from everything else. Yet there remains another possibility, a possibility that science cannot entirely dismiss because it exists within the limits of uncertainty. Not a paranormal possibility, a philosophical one. What if animals experience reality differently, not merely in degree, but in kind? What if the world perceived by a dog is not simply richer than ours? What if it is fundamentally different? Imagine two creatures standing in the same location. One perceives colors, the other perceives magnetic fields. Both occupy the same environment. Yet each experiences a different reality. Neither perception is false, neither perception is complete. Each reveals only part of the whole. Now imagine standing on Overtoun Bridge beside a dog. You see stone, trees, clouds, a gorge. The dog may perceive something entirely different. Invisible scent pathways drifting through the air, the presence of wildlife hidden far below, subtle environmental signals impossible for you to detect. The same location, two different realities. The same bridge, two different experiences. And perhaps that is what makes the witness account so unsettling. Owners repeatedly describe moments when their dogs appear focused on something beyond human awareness. The animal sees it, responds to it, moves toward it. The owner sees nothing. The gap remains, a silence between species, a mystery existing entirely within the difference. Then there is the possibility that has fascinated philosophers for centuries, the possibility that every creature inhabits its own private world. A reality constructed from its unique senses, a reality no other creature can fully understand. If that idea is true, then Overtoun Bridge becomes something extraordinary, not necessarily because of what exists there, because of what may be perceived there. Perhaps the bridge reveals a hidden boundary between human perception and animal perception. Perhaps the mystery survives because we keep asking the wrong question. For decades, people have asked why the dogs jump. Perhaps the more important question is what they experience before they jump. What does the bridge look like through their senses? What does the gorge feel like? What information reaches them that never reaches us? What invisible landscape unfolds before their awareness? The truth is that nobody knows, and perhaps nobody ever will, because there may always remain aspects of another creature's experience that humans cannot access. No investigation can fully bridge that gap. No study can completely eliminate it. No explanation can perfectly translate one mind into another. That uncertainty leaves us with a final thought. A thought both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Somewhere in the history of Overtoun Bridge, hundreds of dogs stopped at the same location. Hundreds focused their attention on the same area. Hundreds reacted to something, whether that something was scent, instinct, environmental information, or something else entirely remains open to debate. But one fact remains impossible to escape. They all perceived something, something powerful enough to command their attention, something compelling enough to alter their behavior, something significant enough to draw them toward the edge, and whatever that something was, the dogs experienced it, we did not. Which means that the greatest mystery of Overtoun Bridge may not be hidden beneath the bridge at all. It may be hidden inside a question humanity has been asking for thousands of years: how much of reality exists beyond the limits of our own perception, and if another creature can see what we cannot? How would we ever know? By the time the year 2019 arrived, most people believed they already knew the story of Overtoun Bridge. The mystery had become famous, documentaries had been produced, newspaper articles had been written, scientists had conducted investigations, animal behavior experts had offered explanations. The bridge had become one of the most discussed locations in Scotland. For many observers, the case was essentially closed, not solved perfectly, but solved well enough. The dogs were reacting to environmental factors. The bridge possessed unique conditions. The mystery, while fascinating, no longer seemed impenetrable. Then another dog approached the parapet, and for 11 seconds, everything became uncertain again. The incident itself was not dramatic at first. No storm darkened the sky, no unusual weather conditions swept across the countryside, no eerie warning announced itself. It was an ordinary day, the kind of day that has begun countless tragedies throughout history precisely because it feels so ordinary. The bridge stood exactly as it always had: gray stone, ancient arches, silent woodland stretching in every direction, the gorge below hidden beneath layers of vegetation and shadow. Nothing about the scene suggested that another chapter in the mystery was about to unfold. A woman arrived with her dog, like countless visitors before her. Like countless visitors who had crossed safely, like countless visitors who never experienced anything unusual. The dog itself had never shown abnormal behavior, no history of aggression, no history of anxiety, no history of unpredictable actions. It was, by every available description, an ordinary companion, healthy, stable, loved. The walk began normally. The dog explored scents. The owner enjoyed the surroundings. Everything appeared calm. Then they reached the section of bridge, the section, the place that appears again and again throughout decades of reports. The same side, the same stretch of parapet, the same location that had become infamous among investigators and dog owners alike. The dog slowed. At first, the owner thought nothing of it. Dogs slow down constantly. A new scent, a sound, a momentary distraction, nothing unusual. But the animal did not continue walking. Instead, it stopped, completely. Its attention shifted, focused, locked, fixed upon something beyond the parapet. The owner noticed the change immediately, not because the behavior was dramatic, because it was strange. The dog seemed unusually interested in the gorge below, unusually attentive, unusually still. Then came the pause. 11 seconds. 11 seconds sounds insignificant, a tiny fragment of time, barely noticeable, yet under certain circumstances, 11 seconds can feel endless. Imagine standing beside your dog. Imagine watching it stare into empty space. Imagine realizing something about its behavior feels wrong, not dangerous, wrong. Then imagine that behavior continuing, second after second, without explanation. The owner later described the moment with remarkable clarity. The dog was not panicking, not barking, not struggling, not acting frightened. The animal appeared calm, almost peaceful. Its entire attention seemed directed toward the gorge below, as though it were observing something, as though it were listening, as though something hidden beneath the bridge had captured its complete interest. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3. The dog remained motionless. The owner called its name. No response. 4 seconds. 5, 6. The dog continued staring. 7 seconds. 8, 9. The animal seemed completely absorbed. 10 seconds. 11. the owner stood only a short distance away, close enough to intervene, close enough to see every movement, close enough to observe every detail, and throughout those 11 seconds, one impression remained overwhelming. The dog did not appear afraid, it appeared fascinated. Then it jumped, without warning, without hesitation, without any visible struggle. One moment it stood motionless, the next, it was gone, over the edge, into the gorge below. The event happened so quickly that the owner had almost no time to react. A single movement, a sudden leap, then the horrifying realization that the impossible had just happened. Again, another dog, another jump, another witness, another chapter added to a mystery already stretching across generations. The dog survived, but survival did little to diminish the impact of what the owner had witnessed, because the fall itself was not what haunted her afterward, it was the pause. Those 11 seconds, again and again, she replayed them in her mind, the stillness, the concentration, the strange sense that the dog had become aware of something, something invisible, something compelling, something worth staring at. Investigators and journalists later focused heavily on this detail. Not because 11 seconds proved anything extraordinary, because the pause mirrored countless earlier reports. Decades earlier, witnesses had described dogs becoming unusually focused before jumping. Decades earlier, owners had reported moments of intense concentration. Decades earlier, people had described the same unsettling feeling, the sensation that the dogs were looking at something, not merely smelling something. Looking, watching, observing, the 2019 incident seemed to echo those older accounts with uncomfortable precision. Different decade, different dog, different owner, same bridge, same location, same behavior, and perhaps that is why the story spread so quickly. Not because it introduced a new mystery, because it revived an old one, a mystery many believed had already been solved. The owner later spoke about the experience in interviews. What stood out was not fear, not anger, not even confusion. It was uncertainty, the inability to explain what she had seen, the inability to reconcile the behavior with her understanding of her own dog. She knew the animal, knew its habits, knew its personality, knew its reactions, yet for 11 seconds, standing only a few feet away, she felt as though she was observing something completely unfamiliar, as though her companion had become focused on a reality inaccessible to her, a reality she could neither perceive nor understand. That emotional tension lies at the heart of the Overtoun Bridge mystery, not whether the explanation is paranormal, not whether the explanation is scientific, but whether the explanation feels complete, because every witness eventually arrives at the same uncomfortable place, the moment where observation ends and uncertainty begins, the moment where certainty dissolves, the moment where the question returns. What was the dog looking at? Perhaps it was scent, perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was an environmental stimulus hidden from human awareness. Perhaps the official explanation is entirely correct, yet standing on that bridge, watching a healthy dog stare into the gorge for 11 long seconds before leaping, certainty suddenly feels fragile. The incident became a reminder that the mystery remained alive, a reminder that explanations do not always erase unease, a reminder that Overtoun Bridge continues generating moments that linger in memory long after they occur, because long after the fall, long after the rescue, long after the interviews, one image remains, a dog standing motionless at the parapet. A dog staring into the gorge below, a dog focused on something no one else could see. 11 seconds of silence, 11 seconds of attention, 11 seconds of unanswered questions, and somewhere within those 11 seconds lies the reason this mystery refuses to die. Because for nearly 70 years, countless witnesses have described the same impossible feeling, the feeling that the dogs are not merely approaching the edge, the feeling that they are responding to something waiting beyond it, something hidden, something unseen, something that, for 11 long seconds, seemed to hold one dog's complete and undivided attention, and whatever it was. The dog never told us. Every mystery reaches a point where the facts run out, the reports end, the evidence stops, the witnesses fall silent. Beyond that point lies something far more dangerous: interpretation. For decades, people have approached Overtoun Bridge searching for a single answer, a definitive answer, a satisfying answer, a final answer. They wanted a culprit, a mechanism, a cause, something they could point toward and say, there. That is why it happens. That is why the dogs jump. That is why the witnesses describe the same behavior. That is why the stories continue. But Overtoun Bridge has never offered that comfort. Instead, it offers fragments, pieces, moments, questions. A bridge, a gorge, ancient folklore, hundreds of dogs, the same location, the same behavior, the same stare, the same leap, the same mystery, and perhaps the most unsettling realization arrives when you stop viewing those details separately, because individually, each element can be explained. A dog can follow a scent, a witness can misinterpret behavior, a landscape can inspire folklore. A tragedy can become linked to coincidence. Each piece can stand alone, each piece can be understood, but when you place them together, something changes. The bridge begins to feel less like a location, and more like the center of a pattern. Imagine standing on Overtoun Bridge at dusk. The last traces of daylight fade behind distant hills, the forest below darkens first, shadows gather beneath the trees, the gorge becomes a black wound cut into the earth, the wind moves softly through branches. Nothing unusual, nothing supernatural, nothing visible, and yet, you know the history, you know what happened here, you know how many dogs have approached this same parapet, how many stopped, how many stared, how many jumped. Suddenly the bridge feels different, not because the bridge changed, because your understanding changed. You are no longer standing on a structure, you are standing on decades of unanswered questions, you are standing above 70 years of uncertainty. You are standing where hundreds of strange stories overlap, and that is when a terrifying thought begins to emerge. What if none of these events are connected? The thought seems comforting at first. Coincidences happen, patterns emerge naturally. Human beings are experts at finding meaning where none exists. Perhaps Overtoun Bridge is simply a collection of unrelated events, a place where accidents, folklore, and tragedy collided, perhaps. But then another thought arrives, a darker thought, a quieter thought. What if they are connected, not by ghosts, not by curses, not by anything easily explained, but connected nonetheless? Consider the witnesses, decades apart. Strangers to one another, different lives, different beliefs, different dogs, yet they repeatedly describe the same thing: the attention, the focus, the stillness, the fascination, the sense that the animals become aware of something, not necessarily something supernatural, simply something capable of overriding everything else. Then consider the location, not the bridge, the location. The exact area where incidents repeatedly cluster, the same stretch of stone, the same side, the same view into the gorge, again and again, generation after generation. Then consider the folklore, the ancient stories surrounding the land long before the bridge existed. Stories of boundaries, stories of thresholds, stories of places where reality feels thinner than it should, places where people claimed the ordinary world became strangely fragile, places where something beyond understanding seemed almost close enough to touch. None of these details prove anything. Individually, they remain just details, but together they form a shape, an outline, a silhouette standing at the edge of certainty. And that silhouette raises the possibility that has haunted Overtoun Bridge for decades. What if the bridge exists at the intersection of things we do not fully understand, not supernatural forces, not necessarily, simply unknown forces, unknown perceptions, unknown influences, unknown experiences. The history of science is filled with phenomena once considered impossible: invisible germs, radio waves, magnetic fields. Entire aspects of reality existed long before humanity understood them. The world did not change when we discovered them, only our awareness changed. Now imagine there are still things we do not understand, still signals we cannot detect, still aspects of perception hidden beyond the limits of human experience. Imagine standing on a bridge where those hidden realities occasionally brush against the visible world, not dramatically, not enough to reveal themselves completely, only enough to create disturbances. Moments, anomalies, questions. A dog pauses, a witness feels uneasy, the story survives, a mystery grows. Perhaps that is what a thin place truly is: not a doorway, not a portal, not a gateway for spirits, a point of contact, a place where reality becomes complicated, a place where certainty begins to break apart, a place where different layers of existence briefly overlap. Whether those layers are psychological, environmental, sensory, or something else entirely remains unknown. But imagine for a moment that such places exist. Imagine that animals perceive them more easily than humans. Imagine that what appears invisible to us appears obvious to them. The implications become deeply unsettling. Because every dog that approached the parapet may have been responding to something real, not necessarily paranormal, not necessarily dangerous, simply real, real in a way we do not yet understand, real in a way our senses cannot access, real enough to command attention, real enough to inspire curiosity, real enough to draw a living creature toward the edge. And if that possibility is true, then the mystery changes completely. The question is no longer, why did the dogs jump? The question becomes, what did they perceive before they jumped? What captured their attention? What held their gaze? What transformed an ordinary walk into an extraordinary moment? What stood beyond the limits of human awareness? The answer remains hidden, perhaps forever, yet there is one final detail that refuses to disappear, a detail that lingers beneath every report, every witness account, every theory, every explanation. Again and again, owners describe the same expression: not fear, not panic, not confusion, interest, recognition, expectation, as though the dogs believed they were approaching something. As though they were not moving toward danger, as though they were moving toward a destination. And that possibility may be the most frightening of all, because if the dogs were not fleeing something, then they were approaching something, something they believed was there, something they believed was real. Something waiting beyond the parapet, waiting beneath the bridge, waiting within the shadows of the gorge, waiting through decades of stories, waiting through generations of witnesses, waiting while investigators searched for answers, waiting while theories rose and fell, waiting while the mystery endured, patiently, silently, unseen. And if Overtoun Bridge truly is a thin place, then perhaps the greatest danger is not what lies on the other side. Perhaps the greatest danger is the possibility that, every once in a while, something from the other side notices us, and for reasons we may never understand, notices the dogs first. At the end of every mystery, there is usually a destination, a conclusion, a final answer waiting patiently at the end of the road, something that allows you to close the book, turn off the documentary, leave the story behind. Overtoun Bridge offers no such comfort. When all the reports have been read, when all the witness statements have been examined, when all the theories have been debated, when every scientific explanation has been considered, the bridge remains exactly where it has always been, silent, unchanged, waiting. Perhaps that is what makes it so unsettling. Most mysteries exist in the past. A crime occurred years ago, an event happened decades ago. The danger is gone. The mystery survives, but only as history. Overtoun Bridge is different, because the bridge is still there, the gorge is still there, the stories are still growing, and every morning, the same ancient stones greet another day, another visitor, another dog, another possibility. Imagine that one day you decide to visit. Perhaps you are traveling through Scotland. Perhaps you are fascinated by strange places. Perhaps you have followed the mystery for years and want to see it for yourself. The journey is uneventful: quiet roads, rolling countryside, old trees stretching toward distant hills. Nothing about the landscape prepares you for what awaits. Eventually, you arrive. And there it is, Overtoun Bridge. Not dramatic, not imposing, not visibly haunted. In fact, the first thing many visitors notice is how ordinary it appears. A beautiful Victorian bridge, weathered stone, elegant arches, a peaceful setting, birds singing, wind moving gently through leaves. The sort of place where families might stop to take photographs. The sort of place where nothing should feel frightening. You step onto the bridge. The stone beneath your feet has carried countless footsteps: tourists, locals, researchers, skeptics, believers, people searching for answers, people searching for ghosts, people searching for nothing at all. And as you begin walking, everything feels normal, perfectly normal. That may be the most disturbing part, because every owner who experienced the mystery began exactly the same way. Nothing felt wrong, nothing felt unusual, nothing warned them. The bridge does not announce itself. It does not reveal its history. It simply waits. Then you reach the section, the place that appears again and again throughout the history of the mystery. The stretch of parapet associated with so many reports, the same side, the same view, the same location. You stop, and you look. Below, the gorge disappears into a maze of trees, shadows, moss-covered stone, and tangled undergrowth. From above, much of it remains hidden. The ravine seems deeper than photographs suggest, darker than photographs suggest, older than photographs suggest. The forest swallows light in strange ways. Shadows gather where they should not. Branches overlap and twist together. The landscape feels untouched, ancient, as though it belongs to another century. You stand there for a moment, listening. The wind moves softly through the trees. A bird calls somewhere in the distance. Leaves rustle. Nothing else, nothing unusual, nothing that explains 70 years of mystery. Yet this is where hundreds of dogs stopped. This is where owners watched their companions become strangely focused. This is where witnesses described that impossible stillness. This is where questions began, and where answers repeatedly failed. You try to imagine what they saw: the dogs, the owners, the witnesses. You try to imagine standing there beside a beloved companion and watching its attention drift towards something invisible, something beyond your understanding, something beyond your perception. You try to imagine the pause, the stare, the focus, the leap, and suddenly the bridge feels heavier, not physically, emotionally, because every mystery leaves traces behind, not supernatural traces, human traces, questions, memories, uncertainty, the accumulated weight of decades spent wondering. And Overtoun Bridge carries all of them. Perhaps the scientific explanation is correct. Perhaps powerful scents rising from the gorge influence certain dogs. Perhaps architecture, instinct, and environmental conditions combine in a tragic way. Perhaps the answer is entirely natural. Perhaps. But even if that explanation proves completely accurate, one uncomfortable fact remains. Hundreds of dogs reacted to something, something powerful enough to capture their attention, something compelling enough to alter their behavior, something meaningful enough to draw them toward the edge. The explanation may tell us what happened, yet it does not completely erase the feeling that there is still something we do not understand. That feeling follows many visitors home, not because they witnessed anything extraordinary, because they witnessed nothing at all, and somehow, that is worse. The bridge offers no evidence, no revelation, no final clue, only silence, the kind of silence that allows questions to grow, the kind of silence that stays with you long after you leave. And perhaps that is why Overtoun Bridge remains one of the most enduring mysteries in the world, not because it proves anything supernatural, not because it disproves science, but because it exists perfectly between certainty and uncertainty, between explanation and mystery, between what we know and what we do not know, as long as that space exists. The questions will survive, and perhaps they always will. Tonight, as darkness settles across Scotland, Overtoun Bridge still stands above the gorge, the same stone, the same trees, the same shadows, the same stretch of parapet. Somewhere beneath it, the wind moves through the ravine exactly as it did 70 years ago, exactly as it did a century ago, exactly as it did long before the bridge existed at all. The mystery remains. Patient, silent, unresolved, and sooner or later, another dog will arrive. It will walk across the bridge beside someone who loves it. It will sniff the air. It will explore the scents carried by the breeze. It will appear perfectly normal. Then it may reach the same section of stone, the same location that has appeared throughout decades of reports, and perhaps it will continue walking. Perhaps nothing unusual will happen. Most dogs do. But perhaps it will stop. Perhaps it will stare into the gorge below. Perhaps it will become focused on something no one else can perceive. And if it does, its owner will find themselves standing before the same question that has haunted Overtoun Bridge for generations. What is it? Looking at, not what is causing it, not what theory explains it. What is it looking at? Because that question remains unanswered. And until it is answered, the mystery lives on. So now the question passes to you. After everything you've heard, after every witness account, after every theory, after every explanation, what do you believe? Is Overtoun Bridge simply a tragic intersection of scent, instinct, and geography? Is it an extraordinary example of animal perception revealing aspects of the natural world we do not yet understand? Or is there something about that place that continues to escape explanation altogether? Let us know what you think, because somewhere among the facts, the folklore, the science, and the stories, the truth may still be waiting, hidden beneath the bridge, hidden within the gorge, hidden in the gap between what dogs experience and what humans can perceive. And until that truth is found, Overtoun Bridge will remain exactly what it has always been, a beautiful bridge, a tragic bridge, a mysterious bridge, a place where hundreds of dogs stopped, stared, and seemed to notice something beyond the edge, something we never saw. Perhaps the real mystery isn't why they jumped. Perhaps the real mystery is why only the dogs appeared to notice it. And if they truly did see something, then one final question remains, as you stand upon that bridge and stare into the darkness below. Are you absolutely certain that nothing is staring back? Tonight, somewhere in Scotland, Overtoun Bridge still stands, not in a photograph, not in a documentary, not in a story. In reality, at this very moment, the stone remains exactly where it has stood for more than a century. The arches still stretch across the dark gorge below. The forest still surrounds it, the same trees, the same shadows, the same ancient landscape, the same silence. The bridge does not know it has become famous. It does not know people travel from around the world to see it. It does not know books have been written about it, that scientists have studied it, that journalists have investigated it, that thousands of people have spent countless hours debating its secrets. The bridge simply exists, patient, silent, unchanged, and beneath it, the gorge remains hidden beneath layers of darkness and woodland. The rocks still wait below, the moss still clings to stone, the roots still twist through the earth, the same wind still drifts through the ravine, the same wind that moved through the trees 70 years ago, the same wind that carried scents to the first recorded dogs. The same wind that brushed against every witness who ever stood upon the bridge, the same wind that moves there tonight. If you were standing on Overtoun Bridge right now, you would probably hear very little, the distant rustling of leaves, the occasional creak of branches. The faint whisper of air moving through the gorge, nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, nothing that sounds frightening, and perhaps that is what makes the place so unsettling, because horror often announces itself, danger usually reveals itself, predators leave signs, storms leave warnings, but Overtoun Bridge offers none. It appears peaceful, beautiful, ordinary. The mystery hides behind normality. The way the most disturbing mysteries often do. Somewhere tonight, another person may be preparing for tomorrow's walk. Perhaps they have never heard of Overtoun Bridge. Perhaps they know the stories but dismiss them. Perhaps they believe the scientific explanation. Perhaps they believe the folklore. Perhaps they believe nothing at all. It doesn't matter. The bridge does not care what people believe. The bridge has outlasted every explanation offered to it, every theory, every argument, every certainty. The bridge remains, and eventually, another dog will arrive, not because of fate, not because of prophecy, simply because dogs and owners continue visiting the bridge. The next dog may already exist. Perhaps it is sleeping comfortably beside its owner right now. Perhaps it spent today chasing a ball through a garden. Perhaps it is curled up on a couch somewhere in Scotland. Perhaps it has never shown unusual behavior, never frightened anyone, never done anything unexpected, a perfectly ordinary dog, just like so many of the others. Tomorrow, or next week, or next year, that dog may cross Overtoun Bridge. Its tail may sway gently as it walks. Its owner may admire the scenery. The sky may be clear, the afternoon peaceful, everything normal, everything forgettable. Then the dog may reach that section of stone, that same section. The location that appears again and again throughout the history of the bridge, and perhaps nothing will happen. Most of the time, nothing does. The dog will continue walking, the mystery will remain silent, the day will end, but perhaps the dog will stop. Perhaps it will slow its pace. Perhaps its attention will drift toward the gorge. Perhaps it will become focused, still, quiet, watching. The owner may call its name. The dog may not respond. The owner may tighten the leash. The dog may continue staring. And for a few brief seconds, everything will become uncertain. The bridge, the forest, the silence, the question, the same question that has survived decades. What is it looking at? Perhaps there is a simple answer. Perhaps there always has been, perhaps. The mystery will one day be solved completely. Perhaps future research will explain every report, every witness account, every jump, perhaps. But tonight, certainty remains out of reach. Tonight, the bridge keeps it secret, and somewhere within that secret lies the reason this story continues to haunt people. Not because we know too much, because we know too little. The dogs experience something, whether scent, instinct, perception, or something else entirely. They experience something, and we never experienced it with them. We only saw the reaction, the pause, the stare, the leap, the silence afterward. That is all we have ever had, the reaction, never the cause. The effect, never the source. The question, never the answer, and perhaps that is why Overtoun Bridge remains so unforgettable, because every mystery eventually confronts us with the limits of our understanding. Every mystery eventually forces us to admit that there are things we do not know, things we may never know. Standing on that bridge, staring into the darkness below, it becomes impossible to escape one final thought. Hundreds of dogs stopped there. Hundreds focused their attention on the same place. Hundreds reacted to something. Whatever that something was, they perceived it. We did not. And somewhere deep within that realization lives a quiet, unsettling fear, not the fear that something supernatural exists, not the fear that ghosts wait beneath the bridge, a simpler fear, a deeper fear, the fear that another living creature may be experiencing a reality that remains completely invisible to us. A reality existing only a few feet away, a reality we cannot access, a reality we cannot understand, a reality we cannot even prove is there, yet one that continues to shape behavior all the same. So tonight, Overtoun Bridge remains exactly what it has always been, a bridge, a mystery, a question carved into stone, and somewhere in the future, another dog will reach the parapet, another dog will pause. Another dog will stare into the gorge below, and for one brief moment, nobody will know what it sees, except the dog, and whatever may, or may not, be waiting there. Perhaps the real mystery isn't why the dogs jump, perhaps the real mystery is why only the dogs can see it. The rain is still falling, and somewhere in Scotland tonight, Overtoun Bridge still stands above that gorge, the same stone, the same silence, the same unanswered question carved into the dark. You have spent the last hour listening to stories that science has studied, investigators have documented, and witnesses have spent entire lifetimes trying to forget, and yet here you are, still awake, still listening, still wondering. That feeling you have right now, that quiet heaviness, sitting somewhere between your chest and the back of your mind, that is exactly what every witness described before the strange things began happening to them. So before you close your eyes tonight, do one thing for us, hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it helps more people find these stories, which means more people lying awake tonight asking the same questions you are asking right now. Subscribe if you haven't already. New stories arrive regularly here on Shadow's Lair. Stories like tonight's. Documented. Real. Unresolved. Share this video with someone brave enough to watch it alone. In the dark. With headphones on, and press that bell icon, because the next story we are preparing may be the one that finally keeps you up until morning. While you are still here, our playlists are waiting for you. Hours of true horror. Hours of documented cases. Hours of questions that have never been fully answered. Every story we have ever told lives in those playlists, and tonight is the perfect night to go deeper. We will see you in the next one, if you make it that far, because the last thing we will leave you with tonight is this: 300 dogs, 70 years, the same bridge, the same spot, the same stare into the same darkness, and not one of them ever told us what they saw. So tonight, when the rain finally stops and the world outside your window goes completely quiet, and you find yourself lying in the dark wondering whether your dog has ever looked at an empty corner of the room a little too long, remember one thing: the dogs at Overtoun Bridge never looked afraid. They looked like they recognized something, something waiting, something familiar, something they had always known was there. Sleep well.